I wake to the sound of nothing. Not silence, something heavier. The kind that sits in the rafters before dawn and refuses to move. The air tastes of dust and attic wood, and somewhere beyond my window, a single cartwheel drags across the cobblestones. London feels wrong. The light coming in has that color it only gets during sickness, pale, washed out, as if the sun itself is afraid to touch the city. People whisper that death came back in the night, that another house was boarded up before morning. I pull my coat tighter, listening for any sign of life. A kettle, a neighbor's footsteps, a cry. Instead, I hear the creak of timber as the wind presses against shuttered streets. They say the plague moves quietly, slipping through cracks, slipping through breath. If you're here with me now, stay close as we walk into this story. And before we continue, leave a light touch on the like button and tell me where in the world you're listening from. It somehow feels less lonely that way, hearing another voice through the dark. Because today we return to the moment when London truly fell, when doctors fled, bells tolled without rest, and entire parishes vanished in weeks. This is not just a tale of numbers or maps. It is the sound of carts before dawn, the smell of lime in the streets, and the weight of a city realizing it cannot outrun what is already at its door. Let's step carefully. The plague is already awake. Subscribe and stay with me. In a city where the walls remember every sigh and sorrow, there are still stories buried beneath the soot and silence. Walk with me deeper into the plague years, where fear seeped through every doorway and hope thinned like early morning fog. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? The past is never as distant as it seems. The morning comes slowly, as if London herself is unsure whether to rise. A dull grey light seeps between the rooftops and drips down the brickwork like watered ink, its touch faint and reluctant. The sun hides behind a thickness of cloud that feels almost physical, heavy, swollen, unwilling to lift. Fog hangs low across the streets, clinging to chimney stacks and sagging over alleys like a damp shroud. Even the birds seem muted, their wings cutting through the air in soft, hesitant strokes, avoiding the rooftops where smoke curls without warmth. Along Bishopsgate, the first footsteps should echo by now, vendors, milkmaids, the restless shuffle of carts. Instead, the stones lie empty, the world holding its breath. A thin trail of smoke rises from a lone hearth, dissolving too quickly into the pale air, as if the sky itself is swallowing every sign of life. Doors remain bolted, curtains stay drawn. The city's pulse, once loud and impatient, has become a quiet, trembling thing that hides beneath the surface of stone. The scent of night lingers longer than it should. Soot, damp timber, and something fainter, an edge of sickness that clings to the cold, like a memory the city cannot shake. It gathers in the corners where moss grows between cobbles. It lingers beneath bridges where rats move in quick, purposeful lines. And on this strange morning, it drifts higher, reaching the open windows of attics, where sleepless families lie still, listening for sounds that never come. A watchman passes through the haze, lantern in hand, though the flame flickers strangely, as if struggling to breathe. His boots scrape against the stones, each step sounding louder than it should in the waiting quiet. He pauses only once near a house whose shutters are closed so tightly the wood seems to groan inward. He does not knock. He does not call out. He simply moves on, shoulders tense beneath his cloak, swallowed by the fog as though it were waiting to take him. London feels different today. Those who wake sense it before their feet touch the floorboards, before they speak their first word or open their first window. The city is thinking, listening, holding something close behind its walls. A mother draws water from a basin and freezes as the bucket echoes too sharply. A baker lights his oven and notices the dough has not risen, though he began it as he always had. A clerk at a small church wipes frost from the steps and wonders why the bells feel heavier when he tries to lift them. Nothing is wrong, not openly. No official has spoken. No proclamation has been nailed to the parish door. And yet London knows. Cities always know before people do. The air carries the tremor first, the heaviness that settles along the rooftops like a dark omen. The fog lingers like breath from something unseen, and the wind, usually restless along the riverbanks at dawn, barely stirs. It presses against the city not as a visitor, but as a warning. By the time the sun finally pulls itself a fraction higher, its pale glow stretched thin over the chimneys, the truth is already in motion. Something has slipped quietly into London's morning, something small, invisible, impossible to name. But it is here, in the stillness, in the silence, in the way the city refuses to wake. And somewhere, deep within this thickening dawn, the first shadow of the plague curls its fingers around the heart of a street that has not yet learned it is already marked. The fog thickens as the morning grows older, spreading itself along the narrow lanes with a strange determination, as though it seeks to hide something, or perhaps protect those who are not yet ready to see. It drifts past crooked chimneys and the broken mouths of gutters, finding its way to a modest timber house near the curve of Bishopsgate. The house looks no different from the others at first glance, leaning slightly from age, its beams darkened by rain, its roof patched with careful, tired hands. But it is the window that marks it, the window on the upper floor, the one facing east, the one that has been covered. Someone has hammered fresh boards across it in the night. The nails are still bright, untouched by rust, glittering faintly in the dim, cold light. The boards sit unevenly, as if the work was done in haste or fear, or both. The rest of the house is quiet, too quiet. The door is shut, the step unswept, the bucket beside it overturned, as though someone dropped it while running inside and never returned to set it upright. A single broom leans against the wall, its bristles wet with dew, but the dew on the handle is disturbed, broken by the marks of trembling fingers. Two neighbors linger at a distance, speaking in murmurs that barely rise above breath. One clutches her shawl tighter, glancing at the boarded window, as though expecting it to look back. The other man keeps rubbing his hands together, though the air is not cold enough to justify the constant motion. They do not approach the house. No one has since the boards were nailed. People passed by quickly during the early hours, eyes lowered, steps hurried. London has long known how to avoid the homes that feel dangerous, even without being told. Inside, the darkness is heavy, thick as velvet. Dust hangs suspended, unmoving, in the stale air. The hearth is cold. A kettle sits beside it, overturned, its contents having pooled and dried on the floorboards long before dawn. A chair lies on its side, its legs snapped, the break clean but desperate. And up the narrow stairs, each step creaking under the weight of silence, lies the room behind the boards. There is a smell there, faint but unmistakable, the smell of fever, of sweat dried into sheets, of something sweet turning sour. The scent clings to the air like a question with no answer, seeping through the cracks in the boards, drifting down the stairs and pooling in the hallway below. If anyone dared step inside, they would feel the warmth still lingering on the pillow, the imprint of a restless body, the way the blanket has been pushed toward the edge of the bed by frantic hands. But no one will enter. Not today. Perhaps not ever. The city has begun to sense what happened here long before the officials will. A cough, heard late at night. A groan no one wanted to acknowledge. A door slammed shut from the inside. And then the long silence that stretched from one dusk to the next, broken only by the sound of hammering 3 quick strikes, a long pause, then 3 more. Those who live nearby now avoid passing under that window, as though the boards themselves might give off a contagion. Children who once played marbles along the gutter now cross to the far side of the street, clutching their toys and refusing to look up. Even the watchman last night walked faster when he reached the corner, lantern held close to his chest, as if the darkness behind the boards might reach out and swallow the flame. London does not yet know the name of what has entered the city, but it knows fear. It knows the shape of danger long before it learns the words. And in that quiet house, beneath the covered window, the plague has already taken its first breath. Morning ripens into an uneasy noon as Bishopsgate stirs in fragments rather than in full. The fog thins, but only enough to reveal how empty the street truly is. Stalls half assembled, shutters cracked open just a finger's width, figures moving behind them like shadows, unsure whether to step into the light. London feels like a great animal holding still, listening for something it cannot yet name. Near the old stone trough where horses once stopped to drink, a woman stands alone. Her shawl is wrapped too tightly, knuckles white where she clutches the fraying ends, but she barely notices the cold. Her face is pale under the weak daylight, her lips parted, eyes glassy. A thin sheen of sweat glistens at her hairline despite the bite of the morning air. She sways once, catching herself on the edge of a barrel. And then it happens, the sound that London will come to dread more than any church bell or rattling cart. A cough, not the ordinary kind, not the clearing of a throat or a polite, minor protest. This one claws its way up from somewhere deep and unseen, scraping against her ribs before it escapes. It echoes along Bishopsgate like a small violence, too sharp, too sudden in the fragile quiet. A cat freezes mid-step. A merchant peeking through his shutters pulls the wood tightly closed. Two boys playing beside the lane scramble backward, holding their breath as though they can outrun the sound. The woman coughs again, harder this time. Her hand flies to her chest as if she's trying to hold herself together. She tries to steady her breathing, but the tremor has already begun, a shudder that moves through her shoulders, down her spine, into her bones. Her basket slips from her grasp, apples rolling across the stones like tiny red warnings. A man approaches from the far end of the street, cautious, uncertain whether to help or retreat. His boots slow as he draws closer, stopping several paces away. He calls out her name softly, almost hoping she won't hear. The woman lifts her head, a thin, shaky smile forming as though she is trying to appear unchanged. But the smile collapses quickly, swallowed by another cough, this one sharp enough to double her over. From one of the houses nearby, a curtain shifts. Someone is watching. Perhaps someone who heard another cough like this in the night. Perhaps someone who remembers the last outbreak, years ago, when entire families vanished behind boarded doors. Fear presses against the windows like a second fog. No one comes out. The woman straightens slowly. Her breath rasps, each inhale thinner than the one before. She tries to stand tall, to gather the fallen apples, to pretend the moment is nothing, but her hands tremble too fiercely. And when she finally speaks, her voice is a whisper, cracking at the edges. "It's only a cold," she insists, though no one asked. Just the morning chill, but the city has already made its judgment. The silence that follows is not polite, it is wary, calculating. Bishopsgate withdraws from her in small, almost invisible motions, windows closing, footsteps retreating, doors easing shut. The man who approached takes one slow step backward, then another, as though distance is a shield. He mutters a prayer under his breath, eyes clouded with dread. He knows better than to touch her. She knows better than to ask. A gust of wind rolls down the street, stirring the hem of her dress. It carries with it a scent that has no name yet, but will soon. A faint sweetness tinged with iron, the breath of fever beginning its quiet march. She coughs once more, and this time blood spots the cloth she presses to her lips. The apples settle in the gutter. Bishopsgate watches, breathless, and in that single crimson bloom on a scrap of linen, London sees its future fast, merciless, and already spreading. Afternoon settles over London like a bruise, purpling the edges of the sky and deepening the shadows beneath every awning and cart. Bishopsgate, usually humming with the afternoon market by now, feels hollowed out, alive only in the way abandoned rooms are alive, carrying echoes rather than voices. A bread stall stands at the center of the lane, its cloth awning damp from the morning fog, its loaves untouched. The smell of baked crust, normally comforting, hangs thick and strangely stale in the cooling air. Beneath it, something moves. It begins with the slightest rustle, barely more than the whisper of cloth brushing stone. Then a pause, long and deliberate, as though whatever stirs beneath the stall is thinking, testing the air. When it finally emerges, the creature does so with boldness, born not of hunger alone, but of a changing world. A rat, large and slick-furred, its body dark as coal dust, its whiskers twitching like probing antennae. It should flee at the sight of humans, at the faint scuff of boots, the creak of nearby shutters. But this one doesn't. It pads out from under the stall as though the street belongs to it now. Its movements are smooth, almost slow, as if savoring the silence that keeps everyone indoors. Its eyes glint with an unsettling intelligence, bright, black beads catching the dim light. A woman watching from a nearby doorway gasps softly and pulls her children closer. They cling to her skirts, eyes round, breath shallow. She doesn't dare step outside to chase the creature away. Rats have always been unwelcome, but today the sight of one feels like an omen, a physical shape to the unease threading itself through the streets. The rat stops beside a loaf that has fallen from the stall some time earlier. It sniffs, nibbles once, then lifts its head as though sensing something more important than food. Its paws shift lightly on the stones. Its nose trembles. It is listening. In the silence, the city speaks. Far down the lane, a door slams. Another cough rises thin, reedy, cracking in the middle. The rat flinches not at the sound but at the vibration in the air, the same way it might sense a storm beneath the earth before lightning ever strikes. It moves toward the gutter, slipping effortlessly through a gap in the stones, but pauses at the last moment to scratch at the underside of the bread stall with a frantic insistence. The scratch echoes like a warning. The stall owner, a weary man in a soot-stained apron, steps outside just in time to see the tail vanish. He freezes. His eyes sweep the street, catching glimpses of movement under other carts, shadows too quick to identify, swarming in places where rats were once fewer and shyer. His hand trembles as he adjusts the apron knot at his waist. Something deep in his bones tells him that this is not a simple infestation. London rats do not behave so brazenly unless something has thrown the balance off. He lifts the fallen loaf and sets it aside, but the gesture feels hollow. There will be no buyers today anyway. He can feel the sickness in the air, though he cannot yet name it. The rat's presence, emboldened, fearless, watchful, feels like a sign that the city's defenses, not just its people, are beginning to fail. From somewhere close, a soft thud sounds, a bucket dropped, a body fainting, a life tipping toward fear. The bread seller steps back into his doorway, heart pounding. The rat has already disappeared into the labyrinth beneath London where darkness is older than stone. Down there, the creatures multiply in silence, slipping through burrows and drains, carrying with them a hunger more ancient than the city itself. And above, in the dimming afternoon light, the first rats appear in the open streets, one, then two, then five, scuttling boldly across Bishopsgate, as if summoned by an invisible call. The plague has found its messengers. London just hasn't understood their language yet. Before dawn has fully faded, a solitary sound breaks the uneasy, quieter bell, struck once, twice, then again, in an uneven rhythm that is wrong for the hour. Church bells in London are meant to follow patterns. They are the lungs of the city, breathing out the hours with practiced certainty. But this bell tolls with hesitation, its voice cracked, as if unsure whether it should speak at all. The sound drifts through the damp air like a shiver. It slides along rooftops and slips down chimneys. It wakes children who had no wish to wake, startles dogs into silence, and causes old men to pause halfway through pulling on their boots. The bell's tone is not deep enough for a sermon call, nor sharp enough for a market hour. It is softer, strained, and the vibration seems to crawl along the bones of the street. At street, Leonard's, the small parish clerk, stands alone beneath the wooden frame. His hands tremble on the rope. He had meant to ring the morning hour, as he has every day for nearly a decade. But when he opened the door to the tower, he found the rope unusually cold, as though the stone had swallowed all warmth from it in the night. His breath caught in his throat. A heaviness settled on his shoulders, one that had nothing to do with the weight of the bell above. He tugged the rope anyway, out of duty, out of habit, out of the fear that if he didn't follow routine, the world would tilt even further off balance. But the moment the bell tolled, the wrongness struck him. The sound did not rise clearly. It wavered, as if dragged down by invisible hands. He stops after the third toll, but the echo lingers longer than it should, thinning into a metallic whisper that stretches through the streets like a final exhale. Outside, the square is empty. Even the pigeons sit hunched and silent on the church roof, their feathers puffed against a chill that seems not of weather, but of something deeper, something pressing down on London, seeping through cracks and corners like ink through paper. A window across the square creaks open. An elderly woman peers out, her nightcap askew, her eyes wide with suspicion. She clutches her rosary and asks the clerk if someone has died. He hesitates. He wants to say no. He wants to believe the bell's faltering voice was merely an accident. But he remembers the boarded window he passed on his way to the church, the hammer marks still fresh. And he remembers the news whispered last night between two men outside the alehouse. A woman collapsed in Bishopsgate, coughing blood into her shawl. He cannot bring himself to answer. Instead, he lowers his gaze and steps away from the bell rope as though it has suddenly grown dangerous. More shutters open one by one. Pale faces peek out. Nobody steps outside. They only listen. Listening becomes the new morning ritual, a collective straining of ears toward the heart of the city. They wait for another ring, another sign, another message carved into the air. But the bell remains, still. The clerk retreats into the church, lighting a candle for comfort. Its small flame shivers, fighting against a draught that wasn't there yesterday. He lifts the candle to read the entry in the parish ledger, the names recorded for the week. There are only 3 so far, but there should not have been any this early in the season. He dips his quill in ink, hesitates, then writes one more word in the margin: unknown. Outside, the square breathes in the silence the bell has left behind. Even without more tolls, the message is clear. London senses a shift in its bones. Something has begun, and it will not stay small for long, long before the fog thickened over London's streets, before the boarded window or the premature tolling of street. Leonard's bell, something else, had already crossed the threshold of the city quietly, without fanfare, borne upon the tide. It arrived not in the shape of omen or rumour, but in the form of a small merchant boat gliding up the Thames beneath a sky the colour of tarnished pewter. The vessel came from across the channel, its hull creaking as though exhausted from the journey. Its sails sagged with damp, heavy with the memory of storms that had beaten against it days earlier. The river welcomed it with a slow, oily ripple, the water thick from autumn runoff and the detritus of harbours far upstream. No other ships greeted it. No dock hands hurried to its ropes. Only the gulls circled quietly, watchfully as the boat drifted toward the wharf. At first glance, it looked like any trading vessel carrying crates of wool, salt, or foreign spices. But there was something about its arrival an imbalance, a hesitance that unsettled even the river's usual rhythm. The mast leaned at a strange angle. The paint along the bow was scoured away as if by frantic hands, and the silence aboard it throbbed against the water like the muted heartbeat of something not quite alive. When it finally bumped against the wooden posts of the dock, the sound was too soft, too subdued. A dock worker on duty, an older man named Corbett, approached with a rope in his hands, muttering at the laziness of foreign crews. But as he drew closer, his steps slowed. The ship's deck was empty, not abandoned in haste, but eerily still, as though the crew had melted into the fog. Corbett called out. His voice echoed off the river, thin and uncertain. No answer. He climbed aboard, boots thudding against the planks. The air shifted around him, a stale, sour scent drifting up from the hold. It smelled faintly of rotting fruit, damp straw, and something else he couldn't yet place. something sweet, metallic, clinging. He stepped toward the hatch. His hand trembled as he lifted the beam, securing it, the wood cold beneath his palms. When he pulled it open, a deeper darkness rose, swallowing the daylight in one slow inhale. Inside lay the cargo, sacks, barrels, crates, nothing unusual. Yet between them, among the shadows, he saw a boot, a leg, an arm slack against a crate, fingers curled inward as though reaching for something in the dark. Corbett staggered back, breath stuttering. His lantern swung wildly, casting fleeting glimpses of pale skin, swollen joints, and eyes half open in a final, frozen plea. There were 3 bodies in the hold, maybe 4. The smell now flooded upward, heavy, fetid, a sweetness that clung to the back of the throat like rot warmed by a dying fever. Corbett dropped the lantern, catching it before it fell too far, and fled the ship, stumbling across the gangplank. He reached the dock with his heart pounding like a drum against his ribs, chest tight, lungs seizing with panic. But he said nothing, not yet. Not because he didn't understand the danger, but because he did. If word spread, the docks would close, trade would halt, fear would spread faster than truth. And London had always been a city that relied on silence to protect itself. But silence is the perfect soil for a plague. By the time the bodies were quietly removed under cover of night, the rats had come and gone. They had climbed the ropes, scurried across the decks, slipped into the hold, and carried their tiny, infected passengers into the dark labyrinth beneath the city. The boat had brought more than goods from across the channel. It had brought the breath of death itself, and London, sleeping, coughing, trembling, was already breathing it in. By the time the sun drags its muted glow across London's rooftops the next morning, an unnatural stillness hovers over the narrow lanes near Bishopsgate. The fog has thinned but not parted. It lingers in soft, clinging threads, slipping beneath doors and curling along stairwells as though it is searching for something, or guarding something, or waiting. At the far end of a crooked row of houses stands a narrow home with a steep, pointed roof and a chimney that leans like a weary sentinel. Inside, the air feels trapped, heavy with the scent of unwashed linen, burnt tallow, and the faintest trace of sickness drifting down from the upper floor. The windows are closed, though the morning is mild. Every shutter has been latched from within. In the attic beneath the rafters, a young boy lies on a thin straw mattress. His hair, once dark and glossy, clings in damp strands to his forehead. Beads of fever sweat shimmer above his brow like dew on frostbitten grass. His breaths come in uneven, pulls long, shallow, punctuated by small, broken gasps. Sometimes he mumbles into his pillow, words soft and slurred, fragments of dreams turned feverish and strange. Beside him sits his mother, her knees drawn close to the bed, her hands clasping a damp cloth she remembers to cool only every few minutes, though time no longer moves properly for her. Exhaustion has carved shadows under her eyes. Her apron is wrinkled, stained with broth she tried and failed to coax into her son's mouth. She places the cloth on his brow, but his skin burns beneath it. From the attic window, a single sliver of light cuts through the gloom. Dust motes spin within it, drifting lazily like drifting ash floating through a dying fire. The mother watches them with a distant, brittle calm. The world has shrunk to this room, this moment, this child. Below, on the second floor, the boy's father paces the narrow landing. He steps softly, as though afraid the creak of the floorboards will steal another breath from his son. His hands clasp and unclasp at his sides. He has never felt this useless. He pushes his fingers through his hair again and again, each pass rougher than the last, but still he cannot stop the silence pressing down from above. Outside the house, neighbors pass quickly, avoiding even looking at the attic window. Some cross themselves quietly. Others whisper to one another about the cough they heard last night, harsh, raw, echoing through the thin attic walls. They whisper about the sleepless mother's silhouette moving behind the curtains like a ghost tending another ghost. But no one knocks. No one brings broth or herbs or prayer beads. London has already begun to draw back from the sick, like a living organism, recoiling from a wound. The fear is still small, still whispered, still hidden but growing. Families sense the shift in the air, the way the sickness seems to choose a house as easily as the wind chooses a direction. Upstairs, the boy stirs. His small hand reaches into the air as though trying to grasp a shape that isn't there. His mother catches it, pressing it gently to her cheek. His skin is hot, too hot, burning like the stones of a hearth left untended. Then he coughs, once, sharply. The sound is heartbreak made physical. A moment later, he coughs again, longer this time, his body convulsing with the effort. The mother leans over him, whispering prayers that unravel as quickly as she forms them. The fever tightens its grip. The father, hearing the sound through the ceiling, stops pacing. He closes his eyes and presses a hand to the beam beside him. He knows without being told that their home has already become marked, that London has a way of sensing which houses are lost before the rest of the world catches up. Above him, the boy's breathing slows again. A soft whimper escapes him. Outside, a rat scurries beneath the eaves, pauses, and listens. And London, in its quiet, trembling way, listens too. The alehouse at the corner of Bishopsgate and Lamb Lane had once been a lantern of warmth in the cold, muddied evenings of London. Its windows glowed with the amber light of hearth fire. Its doors breathed out the smell of roasting meat and malt. Laughter used to rattle its beams. Boots scraped, mugs clattered, and the rough joy of common men stitched itself into the very grain of the tables. But tonight, the silence inside hangs so thick it feels like a second ceiling pressing downward. The hearth is lit, but the flames are small, more a memory of fire than fire itself, casting wavering shapes onto the uneven plaster walls. Shadows drift across the benches, bending and stretching like weary travelers too tired to sit. The wooden floor, usually wet with spilled ale, lies dry and dusty, bearing only the faint marks of earlier footsteps that no longer return. Behind the counter, the alehouse keeper, Holt, wipes the same tankard for the fourth time, though it has long been clean. His hands move in slow, mechanical strokes, the cloth twisting between his fingers like a nervous habit he cannot break. His eyes keep flicking toward the door, drawn by an instinct older than fear, the instinct to expect company when the sun slips westward. But the door remains shut. No clatter of boots, no low voices, not even a single silhouette moving behind the window's cloudy glass. He can feel the pressure of the silence, how it fills the rafters, slips into the cracks of the wooden beams, and pools at the base of the empty stools. It is not a natural quiet. It is a quiet born of hesitation, of people holding their breath somewhere beyond the doorstep, measuring whether stepping inside is worth the risk of whatever they now suspect is spreading through the streets. Holt sets the mug down. It lands with a dull thud that echoes far too loudly. In the corner sits the alehouse cat, curled in a tight, uneasy knot. Its ears twitch at every faint sound, the distant creak of a windowsill, the soft patter of something scurrying outside. Rats have been bolder this week. Too bold. Holt has noticed them darting beneath the doorframe, bold enough to rear on their hind legs, as if surveying the room before vanishing again. He blocked the gap with a plank yesterday. Still, the cat remains unsettled. From the kitchen doorway, his wife appears, wiping flour from her hands. She glances at the vacant room and pauses, her shoulders sinking. She attempts a smile, but her lips barely move. She asks if anyone has come in yet, not because she doesn't know the answer, but because she needs to hear it spoken to make it real. No, Holt murmurs. His voice carries the weight of the empty chairs. She nods once, slowly, almost imperceptibly. For generations, the alehouse had been a refuge, a place where news was traded, jokes shared, grief softened by fire and drink. Yet tonight, it feels like a relic, an abandoned chapel to the city's former life. Even the dust motes, drifting through the hearthlight, move languidly, as though mourning the absence of voices. Outside, a shape passes the window. Holt's head lifts, hope flickering in his chest, but the shadow does not pause. It slips by quickly, its hunched posture sharp against the fading light. A neighbor, perhaps, clutching a scarf over his mouth as he hurries home. No one lingers, no one dares. The alehouse seems to listen to the world retreating. Somewhere in the distance, a cough breaks the quiet, a jagged sound, cutting through the stillness like a blade dragged across stone. Holt's wife stiffens. The cat's tail flicks. Holt closes his eyes. He knows the city is changing. He can feel it in the thinning crowds, the shuttered windows, the way people glance over their shoulders as though expecting something to follow. The air itself feels different, heavy with unsaid fears, thick with the scent of approaching illness. The silence in the alehouse is no accident. It is a symptom. Holt sets the tankard aside, extinguishes the small fire with a heavy cloth, and stands in the dimming glow. Outside, the fog presses gently against the windows, patient and unhurried. It seems to whisper a warning the city is just beginning to hear. London is pulling inward, and the plague is beginning to fill the spaces where people once dared to gather. Dr. Aldwyn Pierce had walked the lanes of London for more than 20 years, his boots wearing smooth paths through soot and cobble. He had tended to births and broken bones, to winter fevers and childhood coughs, to every ailment a city of smoke and sweat could conjure. But lately, as he moved through Bishopsgate with his leather satchel knocking softly against his hip, he felt something beneath his ribs he had not felt since his apprenticeship. Dread. The morning is darker than morning should be. The fog presses low, thick as wool, swallowing the tops of the chimneys and blurring the outlines of the houses into hunched silhouettes. The air smells wrong, like damp linen left too long in a trunk, like sickness finding foothold in the corners of the city. Pierce approaches the house he was called to late the previous night. A slip of paper had been shoved beneath his door, its ink smudged as though written with trembling hands. Come quickly, the fever is worsening. No name, only an address. These days, anonymity speaks loudly. He pauses before the door. The wood is swollen from the night's cold, and the knocker hangs motionless. A faint candle flickers behind a window shutter, its glow escaping through a thin crack like a silent plea. He lifts his hand and knocks once firmly, deliberately. The sound echoes through the street, but when it dies, no one answers. He waits. London used to answer quickly. A latch would lift, a mother's face would appear, a grateful sigh would escape. But now, doors have begun to hesitate, windows remain closed. Entire households breathe quietly, as though trying to convince the world they are empty. Pierce knocks a second time, but no louder than a whisper. The sound barely carries. His knuckles brush the wood, and then he stops. He will not knock again. In the past week, he has learned the language of closed doors. Those inside do not always want help. Sometimes they want silence, anonymity, time to decide whether to admit the truth of what is happening within their walls. He tries the handle, and it gives slightly under his touch. The door is not locked, but the air pushing through the narrow opening is heavy, humid with fever, thick with something sour and metallic. He recognizes it instantly. He feels it lodge behind his sternum like a cold drop of water. He steps inside. The hallway is dim, lit only by a candle guttering on a small table. Its flame flickers wildly as the draught follows him. Dust swirls in the air, fine particles catching the weak light in wavering arcs. A staircase rises at the far end, its banister polished by years of hands that no longer grasp it. Is someone here? He calls softly. A sound answers him, not words, but a soft moan from above. He ascends the stairs slowly, each step creaking under his measured weight. The moan returns, choked, weak. It seeps through the cracks beneath a bedroom door. He pushes it open. Inside, the air is suffocating. A man lies sprawled across the bed, his skin pale and waxen, dark blotches blooming along his neck. His breaths are shallow, rattling in his chest. Pierce approaches but does not remove his gloves. Not this time. The man's eyes flutter open, clouded, unfocused. He tries to speak, but his lips only form the shape of a plea. Pierce places a hand on his shoulder, but his touch is light, almost weightless. There is little he can do, too little. He knows it. The man must sense it, too, for he turns his head faintly toward the shuttered window, as if listening for something outside. A bell tolls faintly in the distance. Pierce steps back. The city breathes around him, shallow, frightened, waiting. He gathers his satchel, closes the door gently behind him, and descends the stairs with the quiet resignation of a man who has seen too much and fears he will see far worse before the week ends. When he leaves the house, he does not knock the door closed. He lets it hang, ever so slightly ajar. London will understand that gesture. It has begun to learn the difference between a doctor's visit and a doctor's farewell. By the time dusk folds itself into the narrow seams of Bishopsgate, the silence has grown bold enough to claim entire streets. What was once the restless heartbeat of London, the thuds of boots, the creak of cartwheels, the chatter of vendors, has faded into a muted hush, the kind found in abandoned monasteries and graveyards. The fog returns with careful intention, draping itself over the city like a funereal cloth, smoothing out movement, muffling sound, dimming every lingering trace of human warmth. A cold wind drifts between the houses, stirring the frayed edges of hanging laundry that has not been collected since morning. It flutters against the walls like pale ghosts tethered by clothespins. A bucket lies overturned in the middle of the lane, water spilled long ago, leaving only a dark stain that catches the dying light. The smell of hearth, soot, and stagnant river air mixes with something sharper, something Londoners are only beginning to recognize: the scent of fear. The cobblestones glisten faintly, not with rain, but with the condensation of a city holding its breath. No footsteps break the street's stillness. Even the stray dogs, usually bold scavengers, lurk beneath stairwells and behind crates, eyes bright and watchful. They sense what people pretend not to, an invisible weight that prowls the air, marking its territory in silence. A lamplighter appears far down the lane, his silhouette wavering like a smudge of ink. His staff swings at his side, and as he approaches the first lamp, his motions are practiced but slower than usual. He must strike the flame thrice before it catches. When it finally flares to life, the light flickers weakly, as though protesting the effort. The lamplighter glances over his shoulder, his breath visible in the cooling dusk, and moves on quickly. He is the only living soul on the street. From a darkened window, a woman peers through a gap in the curtains. She watches him pass, but does not reveal herself fully. Her fingers clutch the fabric so tightly that her knuckles blanch. She used to greet him with a nod each evening, but tonight her eyes dart from lamp to shadow, as though expecting something else to emerge behind him, something that does not rely on footsteps to move. Across the lane, a shopkeeper stands frozen behind his locked door, his forehead resting against the wood. He listens not for customers, but for the absence of them. The silence is unnerving, like the pause before thunder. He imagines hearing faint taps, breaths, small scurrying sounds that do not belong to humans. He tells himself it is the house settling, but the tremor in his hands betrays him. Above him, in the upper stories, families retreat deeper into their rooms. Fires burn low. Voices are kept to whispers. Parents hush children more quickly, fearful the sound might draw attention they cannot afford. The walls of each home begin to feel less protective and more like the thin shell of an egg, fragile, sealed, yet dangerously breakable. London has entered its twilight of denial, that strange, suspended moment when people recognize a threat but cling to the hope that it might still be turned away. But the streets know better. Streets tell the truth long before officials do. They reveal it in emptiness. A rat scurries boldly across the open lane, pausing at the bucket's shadow before disappearing into a nearby drain. Moments later, another follows, then another. Still no footsteps. The lamplighter reaches the end of the street and disappears into the fog, his small flame swallowed whole. For a while, nothing moves, And then, faint but unmistakable, a cough echoes from a distant house, thin, desperate, quietly mourning its own arrival. The city listens. London begins to understand. By the following morning, the fog has taken on a peculiar quality, thicker, heavier, as though it carries not just moisture but the weight of unspoken truths. It sinks low over the rooftops and gathers in the hollows of the streets, obscuring corners where even shadows dare not linger. And on the edge of a modest square near Bishopsgate, the parish of St. Mildred stands changed. It had been a small church, humble, leaning slightly, its stones softened by centuries of damp winters and quiet prayers. The bell tower was squat and crooked, its rope frayed from countless dawn tolls. It was the kind of place where bakers, cobblers, widows, and children found warmth in cold months, where sermons drifted out the open doors in spring, carried by the wind like petals. But this morning, St. Mildred's is silent. A plank has been nailed across the main entrance. Fresh wood, wet nails, the strike marks on the frame are still raw, thin splinters hanging from them like torn fingernails. In the fog, the board looks like a wound. A parchment has been pinned to it. The ink bleeds slightly from the damp, closed, until further notice by order of the parish. No name, no seal, no blessing. The message seems to whisper even without wind. London wakes to the sight slowly. One by one, shutters creak open. Residents peer down into the square, their breath catching at the sight of the sealed door. Some cross themselves out of habit. Others mutter fragments of prayers they haven't spoken in years. A child points from an upper window, only to be dragged back by a nervous hand. Down below, a fishmonger stands frozen in front of the sign, jaw clenched, fingers twitching at the edge of his coat. He had come early, basket in hand, to ask the priest to pray for his aging mother. She had begun coughing in the night, a thin, sharp cough that seemed to reach deeper each time. But the priest is gone, or hiding, or lying still on the other side of the bolted door. The man backs away from the church, step by slow step, as though expecting the wood to burst open and release some unseen terror. On the other side of the square, Mrs. Wren, who, for 30 years, has opened the church each morning to sweep the aisles, stands in her doorway clutching a faded shawl. She knows who hammered the board into place. She heard the knocks in the early hours, rhythmic and hurried. She heard the dragging sound that followed, the muffled voices, the soft litany of the priest as he recited something, plea, prayer, or confession, she cannot say. She clutched her rosary in the dark until her fingers cramped, but she did not open her window. None of them did. Now, she stares at the sealed church with sunken, trembling eyes. For St. Mildred's to close unannounced, unblessed, unaccompanied by the ringing of its bell, does not simply signal caution. It signals death. A gentle breeze stirs through the square, picking up dust and the faint scent of lime. It brushes against the parchment, lifting its corner in small, shivering motions. The fog seems to recoil from the threshold of the church, swirling tightly in the square, as though afraid to touch the wood. A group of boys approach, their curiosity stronger than their fear. They creep close, craning their necks to peek through the gap between the door and the stone. One presses his ear to the wood. His eyes widen. He pulls away instantly, lips parting, breath hitching. "What did you hear?" whispers another. The boy shakes his head, steps back, and refuses to speak. Something had shifted inside the church. Something had moved or settled. Whether it was a voice, a breath, or the fall of a body, no one can be certain. But the message is clear enough. St. Mildred's parish did not close to protect itself. It closed because it was already lost. And the city, watching from behind cracked shutters, begins to realize that the plague is no longer at its doorstep. It is inside its sanctuaries. The fog thins by midday, but the air remains cold with a strange, metallic bite, an aftertaste of dread settling across the lanes of Bishopsgate. Sounds travel oddly in this new atmosphere. A cart creaks somewhere far away. A dog whimpers beneath a stairwell. A shutter slams, though no wind blows. It feels as if the city is listening, every brick leaning in, waiting for the next sign that something has begun unraveling beneath its skin. And then she appears, Mara the milkmaid, moving along her usual route with a pail swinging at her side, though today she walks faster, her steps sharp, her breaths quick. Normally she hums as she works, her voice drifting through London's tangled alleys like a small, hopeful thread. But this morning her mouth is set in a thin line, and her eyes keep flicking toward shadows as though expecting them to shift. A few customers peer from their doorways, hesitant. Mara should stop. She should call out her daily greeting. She should offer milk and bread and soft, simple cheer. But she does not stop. Not until she reaches the third narrow house on Lamb Lane. There, she freezes. It is a modest home, its windows laced with grime, its door warped by years of rain. But something about it is different today, subtle but unmistakable. The curtain in the upstairs room hangs perfectly still, though the window is cracked open. A faint odor seeps out, carried by the cold. Sour, sweet, unnervingly warm despite the chill of the season. Mara steps backward. She has smelled this before. She had carried milk to a family in Whitefriars 2 years ago, when another sickness crept through the city, quiet, short-lived, but vicious. She remembers the smell that clung to the air inside the house, the fever, sweat and decay woven together like a sickening perfume. She remembers the way the mother whispered, "Don't touch the blankets," and the way the air itself felt thick as river mud. The smell coming from the cracked window now is the same. A door opens, across the lane. Old Mr. Varley, stooped and rheumy-eyed, peers out. "Mara?" he calls softly. "Are you passing by today?" She shakes her head quickly, too quickly. "Not this house," she whispers, though her tone is barely audible. "Something's wrong here." Varley frowns. "Wrong? They've been quiet, that's all. Folks are staying in." But Mara steps further back, clutching her pail to her chest as if it could shield her. "No," she says, her breath trembling. "It's not the quiet. It's the smell." The old man stiffens, his hand faltering on the doorframe. He inhales lightly, cautiously. The scent reaches him a moment later, drifting across the lane like a whisper of spoiled apples and dying heat. His eyes widen. Inside the house, a floorboard creaks. It is not the ordinary groan of settling wood. It is slow, dragging like the movement of someone too weak to rise fully, reaching for something in the darkness. Mara steps back again. "We should fetch the doctor," Varley says, though his voice shakes. "Or someone." Mara's eyes dart to the direction of Dr. Pierce's lane. She thinks of the boarded window, the closed parish, the cough that rang down Bishopsgate like a warning bell. "We shouldn't fetch anyone," she murmurs. "Not yet. Not until we know." Varley swallows hard. The fog curls between them like a living thing. Inside the house, the creak comes again, followed by a low, rasping sound too faint to be a cry, too deep to be a whisper. It rises, then collapses abruptly, as if smothered by exhaustion. Mara steps away. "If this sickness is what I think it is," she breathes, "they won't need milk, and we won't need to be near them." Varley shuts his door. Quickly, Mara turns and flees down the lane, her pail clattering against her hip. Behind her, the house remains silent except for the faintest scratch at the upstairs window. A warning London is too afraid to name. By late afternoon, an unfamiliar figure moves through the narrowing lanes of Bishopsgate, a blot of colour cutting against the grey murk that has settled over the city. His cloak, a deep, dried blood red, catches the dim light and drags behind him like spilled ink. Few dare to wear such colour in times of unease. It draws the eye when people would rather blend into shadows. But this man walks with purpose, not caution. He is one of the newly appointed watchmen, tasked not with guarding property, but with marking houses, marking sickness, marking fear. His boots echo sharply on the empty cobblestones, the sound crisp and surgical, slicing through the thick air. A leather satchel hangs at his side, swollen with small jars of lime wash, and a stick of chalk that taps lightly with every step. His face is half covered by a scarf, not from modesty, but from the scent of the air soured, heavy, tinged with the breath of hidden fevers. The city seems to shrink around him as he moves. Curtains tremble, door cracks seal. Families peer through slits in wooden shutters, barely breathing, eyes wide and hollow. Children are pulled back by unseen hands, silenced before curiosity can become danger. He has been down 3 streets already, 3 houses newly silent, 3 chalk marks, small crosses drawn hurriedly, each stroke deliberate and cold. He never knocks twice. After all, knocking is a courtesy reserved for those expected. He is not a welcome visitor. As he turns onto Lamb Lane, the wind gathers around him in a slow, circular sigh, stirring the hem of his cloak like a warning whispered by the fog itself. Before him stands the house Mara the milkmaid fled from earlier, its upstairs window cracked open, the faintest thread of sour warmth drifting into the lane. He stops. For a long moment, he listens not with his ears, but with the stillness of someone accustomed to the language of sick houses. Inside, the muffled scrape of movement, a labored exhale, the steady, damp hum of fever-saturated air. He steps closer. The neighbors watch without revealing their faces. Eyes peek like frightened lanterns through narrow slits, following the man's every motion as though he carries a sword instead of chalk. He reaches the door. His hand doesn't hesitate. He raises the knocker and strikes it, once firm, hollow, final. No answer. He waits. Not long, only enough to honor tradition. Then he produces the chalk. The board is smooth, the wood swollen. The chalk squeaks as he draws the first stroke, leaving behind a pale white line that glows faintly in the dim light. A second stroke intersects it. A third completes the mark, a symbol lighter than bone, heavier than consequence. When he steps back to inspect the mark, the fog curls protectively around it. Behind him, a small voice breaks the silence. Will they die, sir?" A girl stands by the corner post, clutching a ragged doll. Her mother is nowhere in sight. Her eyes are round, heavy with cross. Sleeplessness, too young to understand the shapes that fear is carving into the city. The man in the red cloak stiffens. He turns his head only slightly, not enough for her to see his full face. "Go home," he says quietly, "and stay inside." The girl nods, though her lower lip trembles. She steps backward into the fog, swallowed by it as though the city itself is claiming her. The watchman lingers a moment longer, feeling the weight of his task settle deeper into his shoulders. Then he moves on, cloak fluttering behind him like a trailing wound. As he disappears into the fading light, the chalk mark remains a silent proclamation, stark against the damp wood. By nightfall, 3 more marks will join it, and London, watching from behind shuttered windows, will begin to understand that the plague does not announce itself with thunder or fire. It arrives in chalk, it arrives in silence, it arrives wearing red. The Thames had always been the restless pulse of London, its murmur a low, ceaseless hymn that drifted through markets, under bridges, through alleys, carrying the scent of salt and silt and life. Barges creaked against docks, ferrymen cursed the tide, gulls shrieked overhead. Even on the coldest mornings, the river hummed with motion, as if it alone refused to let the city sleep. But on this day, something has stilled it. The river has stopped singing. The first to notice is a fisherman who rises before dawn each morning. He stands now at the water's edge, nets slung over one shoulder, and frowns at the surface. It lies unnervingly smooth, glass-like, unmoving except for the occasional sluggish swirl of debris drifting aimlessly. No ripple, no chatter of current against the wooden pilings. Even the gulls circle higher, wings stiff, avoiding the surface as though the water has turned to poison. The fisherman's breath fogs in the cold air. The stillness creeps beneath his coat and settles on his skin like frost. He dips a hand into the water, expecting the familiar tug of the current, but the river feels heavy, viscous, almost sluggish. He snatches his hand back and wipes it on his coat. unnerved by the sense that something beneath the surface is watching. Above the waterline, the sky hangs low and iron-colored. Fog coils around the banks in slow spirals, rising and falling like the breath of something sleeping, something ancient and displeased. The usual sounds of the riverbank, the bark of stevedores, the chatter of shipmates, the rhythmic grunt of oars are absent. A single abandoned oar floats by, tapping against the dock with a hollow wooden knock that echoes like a lonely heartbeat. Further upriver, at London Bridge, a small group gathers. They whisper about a boat that arrived earlier, drifting sideways on the tide, unnaturally quiet. Its crew nowhere in sight. No voices, no lanterns, no signs of life on board. Some say they saw a shadow moving. Inside the cabin, others insist the ship was as empty as a tomb. A priest murmurs that the river has taken offense, that something foul has been brought to its waters, something it seeks to carry away but cannot. The idea chills the crowd. They pull their cloaks tighter, staring at the slick, unmoving expanse below as if expecting it to speak. And in a sense, it does. A dead rat floats by, belly up, spinning slowly, then another, and another. Their small bodies bob in the stillness, clumped together like a grotesque procession. The water that once carried life now ferries quiet death, each corpse a tiny, sinister omen drifting toward the docks. A woman gasps and steps back, hand to her mouth. The fisherman curses under his breath. The priest crosses himself, voice trembling. The river is not silent by accident. It has been struck mute by the weight of what it now carries. In the shadows beneath the bridge, a faint thud sounds wood against stone. Another boat drifts into view, its sail torn, its bow scraping gently along the pilings. No one aboard moves. No one aboard breathes. The rope tied to its mast trails in the water like a limp throat, pulled along by a current too weak to stir even a leaf. The crowd retreats instinctively as the vessel glides past. No one reaches out to steady it. No one dares. The Thames, once London's proud artery, has become a mirror reflecting back the truth the city is still trying to deny. Something has entered its waters, something that silences, something that spreads. And now the river waits, its song extinguished, until London understands what it has carried home. Night falls quietly over the city, slipping between rooftops and cloaking Bishopsgate with a hush that feels almost deliberate. The fog returns, denser than before, drifting low like a living veil drawn across the streets. It gathers in corners, winds itself around doorframes, and presses against window panes as though searching for a way inside. People do not speak of it aloud, but each household feels the change, an invisible shift in the air, a heaviness that settles upon the skin and into the lungs. The night air feels wrong. The first to sense it are the stray dogs that patrol the alleys. Normally fearless scavengers, tonight they move with hesitation, noses lifted, sniffing at currents that seem to carry no scent at all. Their ears flatten, their tails lower. They slink into doorways or vanish beneath porches, whimpering softly. Even the rats hesitate before crossing open ground, darting quickly from shadow to shadow, as though pursued by something they cannot see. Inside a narrow townhouse where the shutters tremble with every breath of wind, a young woman named Eleanor sits at the table with her arms wrapped tightly around her body. The candle before her flickers uneasily, its flame guttering as though fighting a draught she cannot feel. Her husband sits across from her, jaw clenched, staring at the unmoving fire in the hearth. Neither of them speaks. The silence between them grows thick enough to swallow words whole. Eleanor lifts her hand to her throat. The air feels heavy, humid, as if laden with the exhalations of unseen lungs. She inhales through parted lips, but the breath seems to cling inside her chest rather than fill it. Her skin crawls, prickling at the memory of sick rooms she tended to as a child, rooms where the air felt thick with dread, alive with the promise of fever. Outside, a long, low groan of wind moves along the rooftops. But it is not a natural wind. It does not rustle leaves or stir dirt. It presses instead, gently but insistently, like a cold hand testing the strength of the city's defenses. Across the street, Mr. Hadlow, a widower with a fondness for late-night smoking, steps onto his stoop. He has weathered many winters and knows the scent of approaching frost, the taste of oncoming rain. But the air tonight feels different, stagnant yet vibrating faintly, as though full of dust too fine to see. He draws on his pipe, but even the tobacco tastes wrong, metallic, bitter, laced with something that makes him grit his teeth. He exhales a slow plume of smoke and watches it disperse. Instead of drifting upward, it sinks, melting into the fog like breath absorbed by a shroud. A shutter bangs open somewhere above, startling him. A woman leans out, eyes sunken, hair unbound. "Do you feel it?" she whispers into the darkness. "The air, it feels sick." Hadlow doesn't answer, but his silence is confirmation enough. Down the lane, a lantern swings on a hook, though no hand has touched it. Its flame stretches, unnaturally, leaning toward the east, drawn by some unseen draft. The light flickers wildly, flaring once before nearly dying. And then, from the direction of St. Mildred's, a sound rolls through the dark. A single, ragged cough carried on the thickened air. It echoes faintly, as though swallowed by something lying in wait. A door slams somewhere. A child cries out. A whisper rises on the fog. "Not again. Not again." Eleanor stands abruptly, heart pounding. Her husband seizes her hand. They both listen. The air hums with an oppressive stillness. Something has changed in London. Something is seeping through the night like a stain, unseen but felt in every breath, every flicker of flame, every tremble in the walls. The city senses it, and as the fog coils tighter around the houses, London begins to understand that the night air no longer belongs to the living. Before dawn breaks, when even the sleepless city seems to hold its breath, two figures move through Bishopsgate with the slow, rhythmic creak of wheels behind them. The carters have arrived, men whose work begins when the rest of London hides behind its shutters. They walk with hunched shoulders and bowed heads, their faces gaunt in the flickering glow of their lantern. The cart they pull rattles softly, its wooden sides worn thin by years of night labor. Londoners know the sound of that cart. It is the sound they do not name. The fog swirls low around the wheels, clinging to the spokes, rising in thin spirals like ghosts unspooling from the earth. The horses that once pulled such carts have been replaced by men who move more quietly, more discreetly, more willing to navigate streets that shy from the tread of hooves. Their boots drag a little on the cobblestones, each step deliberate, each breath visible in the cold air. The first cartman is broad-shouldered, though the years have bent him. His cloak hangs heavily, soaked at the hem by the fog. His hands grip the handles with a familiarity that chills those who watch from behind shutters. His partner, smaller, younger, keeps glancing over his shoulder, eyes darting toward windows where he imagines movement. He carries the lantern, its flame trembling inside the glass as though frightened of what it illuminates. They stop before a narrow house marked by the chalk of the man in the red cloak. The younger cartman swallows. He has only been doing this for 3 months, long enough to realize that early morning work is not paid with coin alone. It requires the forfeiture of sleep, comfort, and the luxury of forgetting. But this morning feels worse. The air is heavier, the silence deeper, the fog smells faintly of iron. "Go on," the older man murmurs. The younger steps up to the door. He knocks once, not out of courtesy, but in case someone inside is still alive and able to answer. The knock echoes, sharply, absorbed almost instantly by the thick, watching fog. Silence. He tries the latch. The door yields. The stench that escapes is soft but unmistakable, the humid, cloying heat of fever mixed with the sweetness of decay. It seeps into the street like a sigh. The younger man recoils instinctively, covering his mouth with his sleeve. The older one touches his shoulder in a gesture, both steadying and resigned. They enter, The lantern light spreads across the hallway, revealing a narrow table overturned, a stool collapsed on its side, a bowl of water long cooled. The air presses close, suffocating in its stillness. They step carefully, boots making soft taps that echo up the staircase. Upstairs, the door to the sick room stands ajar. The younger man hesitates, knowing the sight that awaits. He pushes the door wider. The lantern flame wavers in the humid air. Inside, the family lies together on the bed, three shapes beneath a rumpled quilt. Their faces pale, lips cracked, hands still. A mother's arm draped protectively across the smallest form. A father's fingers curled loosely toward the floor. The child nestled between them, frozen in a posture that once meant comfort. The younger cartman bows his head. He had delivered firewood to this house 2 weeks ago. The boy had smiled at him. Gently, the older man whispers. Wordlessly, they begin their grim work, lifting, wrapping, carrying. The silence becomes a presence, filling every corner of the room, draping itself over their shoulders like a shroud. Down the stairs they move, bodies cradled with a strange tenderness, as if careful handling could still grant dignity to those denied a final breath. Outside, the fog thickens around the cart as the first bundle is laid inside. One family, 3 shapes, tucked beneath coarse cloth, and the carters move on. They will visit 3 more houses before sunrise. By the time the first weak light touches the rooftops, the cart will be full. By the time the church bell rings, if it rings at all, London will have lost more than it dares to count, and the carters, walking home through silent streets, will leave no footprints. The fog swallows everything. By mid-morning, the fog has not lifted, it only rises, coiling upward in slow, ghostly strands that cling to chimneys and window frames like fingers refusing to let go. London moves beneath it in a fractured rhythm, each sound muffled, each breath measured, each door opened only a cautious crack. And through this blurred and shifting world walks Dr. Aldwyn Pierce once more, his cloak drawn tight, his satchel heavy with instruments that increasingly feel like relics from a gentler age. He is on his way back to a house he visited 3 days ago. 3 days, once long enough for a fever to break, now long enough for an entire household to fall silent. As he approaches the lane, he hears nothing, not even the familiar creak of swinging signs or the distant murmur of market voices. The wind does not speak. The birds do not stir. The smell that clings to the fog is warmer now, tinged with neglected food, stale sickness, and the faint sweetness he has come to dread. The house stands at the end of the lane, its shutters closed, its door unlatched. It seems to lean inward, as though trying to hide its own entrance. Pierce pauses at the threshold. He remembers the woman who answered his knock on his first visit, her hair pulled tightly back, her face lined with worry, her voice thin but steady as she asked if her husband's fever would break soon. He remembers her hands, trembling. He knocks once, out of ceremony more than hope. Silence answers. The door groans softly as he pushes it open. The hallway beyond is dim, lit only by a single candle that has burned nearly to the base. Wax has pooled around it like spilled milk, hardened in uneven ripples. "Mrs. Greer," he calls gently. "It's Dr. Pierce." His voice echoes strangely, as though the walls absorb sound only to release a hollow imitation of it. He steps inside. The table in the hallway remains untouched, though a bowl of broth has grown a thin film across its surface. A shawl lies discarded on the floor, half folded, as if dropped mid-motion. A staircase rises at the back of the hall, each step darkened by shadow. He ascends slowly. The air grows warmer, thicker, breathless. At the top of the stairs, the sick-room door stands slightly ajar. Pierce pushes it open with 2 fingers, the wood resisting as though reluctant to reveal what lies within. Inside, the room is dim. The curtains have been drawn, making the air feel trapped. A man lies on the bed, Mr. Greer, his face pale as wax, his body still beneath the rumpled sheets. One hand rests limp against the coverlet. The other has fallen toward the edge of the bed, fingers curled inward like a claw. Pierce approaches, heart heavy. He places 2 fingers against the man's wrist, cold, still. He closes the man's eyes with quiet reverence. Only then does he notice the narrow shape slumped beside the bed. Mrs. Greer sits in a wooden chair, her head bowed as though in prayer. But she is not praying. Her hands hang at her sides, palms open, and her lips have parted slightly. Her hair spills loosely over her shoulders. She looks as though she fell asleep in grief. Pierce kneels beside her and touches her hand. It is cold. He bows his head. The silence wraps tightly around him, humming faintly with despair. For a moment he allows himself a shudder that he would never show in public. This family was alive 3 days ago. 3 days, so fast, too fast. He stands slowly, his fingers trembling, his breath unsteady. He must report this. He must send for the Carters. He must. A faint sound cuts through the fog outside, a shuffle, not quite human, passing beneath the window. Pierce stiffens and steps to the shutter. He peers through a narrow crack. A rat, large, glistening, bold, scurries across the threshold and disappears down the lane. Pierce closes the shutter firmly. Then he gathers his satchel, steps into the hallway, and pulls the door gently shut behind him. The chalk mark on this house will be drawn before dusk. London's tally grows, and the plague, unseen but relentless, tightens its grip around the city's throat. By late afternoon, the fog has thinned just enough for London to see itself and recoil. What was once a city of restless movement now lies unnervingly still, as though frozen between breaths. The streets bear an abandoned look, scattered with forgotten baskets, overturned stools, and damp scraps of linen that flutter faintly like ghosts pinned to the stones. Inside a sagging townhouse near the Clerk's Quarter, a peculiar quiet fills the dim rooms. Dust lies thick on the mantel. The ashes in the hearth are cold. A pot of water sits atop the grate, untouched, the surface reflecting only the dull light creeping in through the shutters. It is a house where silence has begun to settle, like a permanent resident, heavy, unmoving, inevitable. But silence is never absolute in a city such as this, for beneath the warped floorboards of the upper room, a faint cry stirs. It begins as a whimper, so small and muffled it could be mistaken for the creak of settling beams. But then it comes, again longer this time, sharper, yet still suppressed, as though swallowed by layers of dust and darkness. It reverberates through the floor with a trembling insistence. A neighbor across the shared wall hears it first. Mrs. Turnley, an elderly widow with white hair coiled tightly beneath her cap, freezes mid-stitch when the sound reaches her. The thread slips from her fingers. She holds her breath, listening. There it is again. A cry. A child's cry. Her heart clenches. Memories flood her nights long ago when her own children cried under blankets, their small chests rattling with winter fevers. But this sound is different. It carries a thread of terror woven into it, something that makes her blood run cold. She rises slowly, joints aching, and crosses to the wall. Pressing her ear against the cracked plaster, she listens. The cry echoes faintly, trapped beneath the boards next door. She knocks, gently. No answer. She knocks again. Still nothing. Mrs. Turnley clutches her shawl. She knows the family who lives there, the Bennets. A mother, a father, and 2 small children. She has not seen them in days. Fear lodges deep in her chest. Summoning courage, she steps into her hallway and knocks on the Bennets' door. The wood is cool under her knuckles. She knocks again. Louder. No creak of footsteps, no shuffle behind the latch, nothing but the soft rattle of her own breath. The cry returns this time directly beneath her feet. Her eyes widen. She pushes the door, and to her horror, it swings open. The smell hits her first, a thick, humid odor of unwashed bodies, fever sweat, and something far sweeter, far more sinister. The air hangs still and heavy as a curtain. She raises a trembling hand to her mouth. Inside, the house is dim. The shutters are closed. A chair lies overturned. A cup has been smashed against the wall, its shards glinting faintly in the weak light. And then she sees them. The parents lie on the floor beside the bed, the mother's hand still reaching toward her child's cot. Their faces are pale, mottled with dark swelling beneath the skin, their eyes fixed in the glazed stillness of death. But the cot is empty. The cry comes again, softer now, choked. Mrs. Turnley's gaze snaps downward. A loose board near the fireplace trembles slightly, and beneath it fingers, small, fragile fingers scraping at the wood. A child hides there, trapped between the beams, surviving on whatever fear and instinct have kept it breathing. "Oh, dear God," Mrs. Turnley whispers, tears gathering at her eyes. She kneels, pushing aside the plank with trembling hands. A little girl, no more than 5, stares up at her, eyes wide, cheeks streaked with grime and tears. Her lips quiver, her breath hitches. "Help! Help me!" she manages, voice raw. Mrs. Turnley gathers the child into her arms, her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The girl is feverish but conscious, terrified but alive. Behind her, the corpses lie, silent, witnesses to a tragedy unfolding in the cramped confines of their home. Outside, the fog curls against the windows, patient, watchful. Mrs. Turnley steps into the darkening street, clutching the trembling child. She does not know what will become of the girl, whether safety still exists anywhere in a city tightening beneath the plague's grip. But she knows one thing: London is starting to scream, quietly, beneath its own floorboards. By the time morning light bleeds weakly across London's rooftops, the marketplace, once the clattering, beating heart of Bishopsgate, has collapsed into a hollow skeleton of what it once was. The stalls stand in crooked rows, their awnings sagging like wilted petals, dripping with last night's fog. The baskets that should be overflowing with vegetables lie overturned or half-filled, their contents bruised, shriveled, or abandoned altogether. A few toppled crates bleed apples across the stones, the fruit rolling slowly, aimlessly, as though unsure where to rest. The air here is different, stagnant, swollen with the sweet rot of produce left untouched. The smell of drying fish, spilled grain, and decaying herbs gathers beneath the tarps like a quiet, sour cloud. Normally such smells blend into the noisy tapestry of market life, drowned beneath the shouts of merchants and laughter of children. Today, with no voices to compete with, they dominate the air with unsettling clarity. A single figure wanders through this desolation. Johann the basket maker, his coat patched, his eyes sunken from a night without sleep. His livelihood depends on the bustle of these streets, the clinking of coins, the hurried barter of sellers who can't afford to waste daylight. But this morning, as he walks with slow, measured steps between the stalls, he carries not baskets, but the weight of a truth London is only beginning to acknowledge. No one is coming. He reaches his own stall, where a dozen willow baskets sit stacked in neat rows, unfinished orders for customers who have not arrived. He runs a hand over the smooth rim of the top basket, feeling the slight give of the weave. He spent hours shaping it, as he always does. But today it feels like a relic of a time that is slipping away faster than he can comprehend. A soft rustle breaks the stillness. Johann freezes. His fingers curl instinctively around the handle of the basket. He listens. From behind the herb seller's tent, a rat scurries out, pausing mid-step to sniff the air. Its fur glistens with damp, and its eyes glint with an unnatural boldness. As Johann watches, another rat joins it, then a third. They move without fear, weaving between stalls, nibbling at rotting vegetables and overturned sacks of grain. Johann's skin prickles. Before the plague whispers began crawling through the city, rats were nuisances, quick, furtive, terrified of human presence. But now, with the market emptied of its crowds, they roam as though inheriting a land left to them by a dying civilization. He steps backward, nearly tripping over a fallen cabbage. The rats freeze, staring at him with eerie stillness, as though weighing whether he is something to flee from or something to approach. A sudden clang shatters the moment. Johann whirls to see a tin cup rolling across the stones, stirring echoes that ripple unnaturally through the hollow square. He expects to see someone emerge, a merchant, returning for forgotten goods, a late customer seeking bread. No one appears. Only the wind responds, lifting the corner of a canvas tent. The cloth flaps once, then falls still again. Johann's breath catches in his throat. He senses eyes on him, watchful, unseen. From behind shutters, families perch like ghosts, observing the empty stalls that once sustained them. Their gazes carry not curiosity, but resignation, fear, a quiet mourning for a life that is already slipping out of their reach. He hears a whisper, one of the few remaining vendors speaking from a doorway. They say the sickness spreads fastest where food spoils. Johann does not answer. His throat feels tight, because he knows something far worse than spoiled food is spreading through the marketplace. He leaves the square quickly, boots crunching through wilted leaves and rotting fruit. Behind him, the rats resume their feast, unbothered, unhurried, and the marketplace, London's once living artery, stands there in its eerie stillness, with empty hands outstretched, as if begging for life that refuses to return. The city has begun to starve, not from lack of food, but from the absence of those who once touched it. At the far end of Bishopsgate, where the fog thickens around the crooked spire of St. Leonard's, an old man climbs the tower steps with a slowness that betrays both age and fear. His name is Brother Hale, the bell ringer who has greeted every dawn for 37 years with steady hands and an unbroken rhythm. His footsteps today, however, falter. Each wooden stair groans beneath him like an old friend grown weary of carrying bad news. The air inside the stairwell is colder than the air outside. It smells of stone dust, extinguished candles, and the faintest hint of mildew clinging to the walls. A single lantern flickers in Hale's grip, casting long, crooked shadows that slip and shiver behind him with each step. He has rung the bell countless times before, in war and winter, in famine and in festive seasons. Yet never has he ascended these stairs with such dread pressing against his ribs. He reaches the final landing, breath thin, hands trembling. As he pushes open the heavy, wooden hatch to the belfry, the wind greets him, not a lively wind, but a slow, dragging one that feels more like a sigh than a breath. It pulls at his cloak, cold and searching. The fog swirls into the chamber in long ribbons, sliding around the massive bell that looms at the center like a silent sentinel. Hale sets down his lantern. Its flame flickers once, then steadies. He grips the bell rope. The hemp, usually rough and familiar beneath his fingers, feels damp today, as though it has absorbed the fears and whispered prayers of the congregation below. His pulse echoes in his palm, too fast, too fragile. He draws a breath, bracing himself. The bell must ring. No matter what death walks the streets, no matter what fear tightens its grip upon London, the bell must sound. It is the signal that life continues, that time has not ended, that the city still stands. He pulls. The rope resists at first, stiff, unyielding, then suddenly gives, jerking downward with a weight that nearly pulls him off balance. The bell groans, deep and mournful, as if waking reluctantly from an ancient sleep. Its first toll rolls across the rooftops, heavy as thunder, swallowed quickly by the fog. Hale waits for the echo, but the echo is wrong. It does not return as a clear second voice. Instead, the sound scatters across the mist, breaking apart into thin, trembling fragments, as though the fog itself is devouring the bell's cry. Hale's hands tighten on the rope, sweat beads at his temples despite the cold. He pulls again. A second toll lower, strained shivers through the air. This time, the bell vibrates unevenly, the tone warped as though dampened by unseen fingers pressing against its bronze. Below, in the streets, windows crack open. Pale faces appear, listening. People clutch each other. Some cry quietly, others cross themselves. The sound that reaches them is not the bell they know. It is a weakened sound, a wounded one, a sound of a city faltering. Hale feels it too. The rope trembles beneath his grip. His hands shake harder now. A memory rises unbidden, a plague 20 years past, when he was younger, stronger, and the bell tolled day after day for the dead. He remembers the tolls losing their clarity, the city falling quiet except for the creak of carts in the night. He remembers praying the sound would never warp again. Yet here it is, warped, fragile, afraid. He pulls a third time. The bell answers, but faintly. Its voice is retreating. Hale's breath catches, his throat tightens, his vision blurs. He drops to one knee, pressing a trembling hand against the cold stone floor as the wind coils around him like a serpent. Below, London listens to the faltering bell, to the trembling hands behind it, to the warning hidden in every wavering note. And as the final, weakened toll fades into the fog, the city understands not in words, but in its bones, that the bell has begun to ring, not just for the hour, but for the plague. The morning after the bell's weakened toll, London wakes to a sense of dread so palpable it feels woven into the fog itself. The city's breath runs shallow. Conversations collapse into whispers. Every street corner carries the same low hum of unease, like the trembling before a storm. And as the sun fails once more to pierce the grey shroud above, a group of city wardens move through Bishopsgate with hurried steps and grim faces. They carry scrolls tucked beneath their arms, parchments stamped with the city's seal and written in firm, uncompromising hand. The words upon them have been drafted in candlelit chambers through sleepless hours, argued over by men pale from fear and desperate from knowing. The news is not unexpected, but it arrives like a blade in the quiet of morning. It is the order to bar the doors. By decree of the city magistrates, households with confirmed fever will be sealed from the outside, shuttered, locked, and marked. No one enters, no one leaves. The Brend wardens advance through the lane like somber heralds, accompanied by 2 carpenters whose belts bristle with nails and hammers. Their boots strike the stones with a rhythm like a funeral march. London watches them, trembling behind shutters, clutching rosaries and shaking hands, knowing the meaning of their arrival. The first house they stop at is small, its windows dark, its doorstep swept with the frantic neatness of a family hoping appearances might save them. A woman stands in the doorway, shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes dart between the wardens, pleading without words. "Please, please," she whispers, blocking the entrance with her body as if her thin frame could hold back the world. "My husband is resting. He is improving. He only needs broth," and the warden offers her a folded parchment. His expression cracks with something like sorrow but remains firm. "It is the law now," he murmurs, "for the safety of the city." The woman's breath catches. She presses the parchment against her chest as though it might warm her or shield her. Behind her, the faint cough of her husband drifts upward, a harsh, scraping sound that seals the warden's silence. The carpenters advance. One gently moves the woman aside, the other lifts the first wooden plank. The hammer rises, poised. The first nail sinks into the doorframe with a sharp, ringing crack that echoes through the lane like a gunshot. Neighbors flinch. Children bury their faces in their mothers' skirts. The woman presses her palm to the door, tears streaking silently down her cheeks. From inside, another cough answers the bell-like sound of the hammer striking wood. The rhythm continues. Strike, pause, strike. A brutal heartbeat. At the second house, no one answers the knock. The wardens exchange a look, then push the door open. A family lies inside, curled together like fallen leaves. They bar the door anyway. The law demands uniformity, even the dead must be sealed. Further down the street, an elderly man tries to bribe the wardens with trembling coins. They refuse. Another woman tries threats. Another kneels, begging. None succeed. The plague has left mercy behind. The city must now follow. With each boarded door, the fog thickens. With each hammer strike, hope thins. By midday, the wardens have sealed 14 houses. By dusk, 20. The sound of hammering spreads through Bishopsgate like the tolling of a second bell, one not forged of bronze but of wood and nails, each strike announcing another home surrendered to the invisible enemy. From behind barred windows, London listens, eyes wide, hearts pounding as the order moves steadily, relentlessly, street by street. And as the last nail of the day is driven into place, the truth settles over the city like an icy shroud. The plague is no longer simply present, it is now in control. St. Bartholomew's stands at the heart of Bishopsgate, like an aging sentinel, its stones darkened by centuries of rain, smoke, and whispered confessions. On this dim morning, one smothered beneath a sky the colour of old pewter, it is the only church left with its doors unbarred. Every other parish in the district has shut its gates, sealed its entries, or quietly extinguished its candles. But St. Bartholomew's still breathes, faintly, through a crack of light beneath its worn oak doors. Inside, the air holds its own peculiar heaviness. It smells of tallow smoke, damp wool, and the faint, metallic tang of fear. Candles flicker in trembling halos along the nave, each flame leaning uncertainly, as though bracing against a draught no one can feel. The pews, once polished by generations of congregants, sit half empty, the wood cold under the few scattered bodies brave or desperate enough to attend. At the altar, Father Ambrose struggles to hold himself upright. His once robust frame has thinned, his cassock hanging loose on his shoulders. He grips the pulpit with both hands, knuckles pale. His breath comes raggedly between sentences, as though every word requires a small surrender of life. "My children," he rasps, voice scraping like old parchment, "stand fast in faith, though shadows gather at our doors." His congregation, fewer than a dozen, listen with wide, exhausted eyes. A mother clutches her coughing daughter. An elderly couple sit pressed together, hands intertwined tightly as roots. A young man keeps glancing toward the doors, as if expecting someone to burst in or collapse outside. Father Ambrose pauses, swallows, steadies himself. He sees the fear etched into their faces, recognizes it from his own mirror. He tries to lift their hearts, but every cough that rises from the pews strikes him like a hammer blow. He knows what is coming. They all do. From outside, muted sounds seep through the church walls. The distant pounding of hammers, the muffled sob of a woman receiving the order to bar her home, the skittering of rats growing bolder in the empty lanes. Father Ambrose raises a trembling hand to offer blessing and falters. A sudden tremor ripples through him. He clutches the pulpit harder, eyes squeezing shut as a cough forces its way up his throat. He turns his face away, but the congregation hears it wet, raw, filled with dread. When he pulls the cloth from his lips, his hand trembles at the sight of a small, bright fleck of red. He hides it quickly, but not quickly enough. The young man near the aisle sees. His eyes widen. He inches backward. The mother tightens her hold on her child and whispers a prayer under her breath. The elderly couple look down, tears gathering unbidden, knowing, truly knowing, that the priest they have turned to for comfort is already losing the battle. Father Ambrose forces himself upright again. "Fear not," he whispers, voice barely more than breath, "for God walks with us, even now." But the words fall thinly in the cold air, dissolving before they reach the rafters. A gust of wind pushes through the crack beneath the door, sweeping softly along the floor. The candles nearest the entrance shiver and gutter. One extinguishes completely, leaving a thin ribbon of smoke spiraling upward like a prayer abandoned halfway to heaven. The congregation stares. They know a sign when they see one. Outside, a bell tolls faintly, another house marked, another family sealed, another nail driven. Inside, Father Ambrose bows his head. For a moment, he allows the weight of his failing body to bend him. Then he lifts his eyes toward the dim-stained glass above images of saints blurred by grime and time, and he whispers a prayer until his voice cracks. The church feels smaller now, darker, hollowing by the breath. When the service ends, no one lingers. One by one, they slip out into the thickening fog, clutching cloaks tightly around themselves, avoiding one another's eyes. The doors of St. Bartholomew's remain open, but the light leaking through them is thin, fading. By nightfall, the priest will collapse. By tomorrow, the doors of the last open church may close, and London, robbed of even its sanctuaries, will have nowhere left to place its trembling faith but in the shadows. Late in the afternoon, when the fog of Bishopsgate begins to thin only slightly, a different scent reaches the streets, a tang of smoke, acrid and bitter, rising from Holborn Lane. At first, it is faint, almost imperceptible over the thick, damp air that hangs over London. But soon it grows sharper, a clawed hand reaching into the lungs of anyone who happens to breathe it. The lane is narrow, flanked by buildings that lean upon one another for support, their timber frames warped and cracked from decades of rain and neglect. In the haze, the flicker of orange and red glimmers through the grey, dancing along the upper floors of the houses. No one is on the streets, not by choice. The usual merchants, carters, and children have retreated behind shuttered windows, curtains drawn tight, doors bolted. The city is holding its breath, and yet the fire claims Holborn Lane without witnesses, consuming slowly, deliberately, licking at the wooden beams, curling around eaves, and flaring along the pitch-dark timbers. The glow moves like molten gold through the fog, illuminating the outlines of soot-stained walls and cracked windows. At the corner, a man crouches behind a collapsed barrel, peering through the fog. His face is pale, sweat streaking along his temples despite the chill. A cough escapes him, soft and trembling, almost lost beneath the roar of the fire. He knows better than to approach. Fires in London rarely stay contained in one house when the city is this weak. The flame can leap, like the plague itself, from one timber to the next, consuming everything in its path. Inside the burning house, a widow and her 2 children are trapped in the upper story. Smoke coils along the rafters, curling around their thin bodies and filling the room with a sweet, suffocating heat. The widow presses a hand to her daughter's mouth, trying to muffle her terrified screams. The younger boy trembles beneath the bed, eyes wide, staring at the curling shadows that dance along the pond walls. The flames cast grotesque patterns over faces that have only begun to understand the true weight of fear. Outside, the wind shifts, carrying sparks across the street. A thatch roof catches immediately, and the flames leap higher, illuminating the fog like a predator's eye. Rats scatter from the alleyways, their small bodies silhouetted against the growing glow. London itself seems to flinch, the thick fog parting in silent horror, as if even the mist knows the devastation underway. The man behind the barrel swallows, trying to control his shaking hands. He moves closer, creeping along the wall, hoping to see if the family can escape. But he dares not enter, not yet, not while the fire roars with such unchecked hunger. He sees the widow's hands lifting toward the window, futile gestures against the encroaching flames. The children huddle closer to her, their small bodies pressed into hers, seeking warmth that will not save them. The fire grows. Its scent thickens, sweet and pungent, weaving itself into the damp fog, mixing with the lingering odor of rot and decay from the streets around. Holborn Lane becomes a corridor of smoke and heat, a theatre of quiet devastation, the dancing light illuminating splintered walls and warped doors. Every wooden beam cracks and moans, as if lamenting the life it shelters. In the distance, a bell tolls, faintly, mournfully, another house marked, another family claimed. Holborn Lane may survive the fire, or it may not, but the streets of London have already begun to feel the weight of inevitability, that nothing remains safe, that even the flames cannot be outrun, and that the city itself is slowly hollowing, consumed by fear, disease, and now, fire. The widow's hands reach one last time toward the smoke-darkened ceiling, and the children cling tighter. Outside, the man watches helplessly, the glow painting his face with the realization that London is no longer a city, it is a grave. Evening settles over Bishopsgate like a wet cloth pressed against the city's face. The fog rolls in, heavier than before, curling through alleyways and wrapping the crooked rooftops in ghostly shrouds. Candlelight flickers faintly behind shuttered windows, dim and hesitant, as though afraid of drawing attention. In the silence that follows the bell tolls and the hammering of boards, a single sound rises, a tiny, desperate noise, fragile yet insistent. A child? She perches on the sill of an upper-story window, her small fingers gripping the ledge until her knuckles whiten. The glass is cold beneath her palms. Her face is pale, streaked with dirt, cheeks hollowed from hunger and fear. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, scan the street below, searching for shapes that might be familiar, for shadows that might carry life, for any sign that the world beyond her window still belongs to the living. Inside the room, remnants of hurriedly abandoned life lie scattered. A half-finished meal rests. On a table, cold and growing stiff, clothes are strewn across the floor, tossed aside in frantic moments of retreat from the unseen sickness. The child's mother lies behind a curtain, her breathing shallow, her presence more shadow than flesh. The father is nowhere visible. His absence is a presence in itself, hollow and accusing. The child rocks slightly on the sill, toes curled over the edge, her small body tense and ready to spring if danger approaches or if relief presents itself. Outside, the streets are empty. London has withdrawn into itself, shuttered and cautious. The few remaining inhabitants hiding behind walls and thick curtains, peering out with eyes wide and hearts faster than usual. The air smells faintly of smoke and rot, mingling with the metallic tang of sickness that has begun to lace every corner of the city. From down the lane, a cart creaks across the cobblestones. Its passage is slow, deliberate. The lantern dangling from its side swings unevenly, casting long, jittering shadows that stretch toward the child, clawing at the walls of her small refuge. Her gaze follows the movement. Her lips part in a soft, almost silent plea. She knows the carts carry the dead, and perhaps soon they may come for those who remain alive. A rat scurries along the ledge, pausing briefly at her side. Its small black eyes glint in the faint light. The child freezes, heart hammering, willing the creature to vanish. The rat does, slipping into the shadow beneath the window like a whisper of death itself, leaving only the cold air behind. The child coughs once, a sharp, dry sound that echoes slightly against the walls of the narrow street. She presses a palm to her mouth, eyes darting toward every corner. Somewhere beyond the fog, a door bangs. Somewhere beyond the fog, someone whispers or cries. Somewhere beyond the fog, the city breathes with the weight of fear. She rocks back, curling into herself, resting her forehead against the cold glass. Her breaths are uneven, shallow, each inhalation pulling in more of the heavy, foul air that has settled over the city. The fog presses against the window pane, thick and cold, as if to whisper a warning, as if to remind her that the city is no longer safe. A faint glimmer of movement catches her eye, a shadow, barely perceptible, shifting under the street lamp farther down the lane. She holds her breath, waits, watches, hears only the distant hollow echo of a bell, faint and far, tolling for homes already lost. The night deepens. The child remains at the window, a fragile sentinel. Her small hands clutch the sill. Her wide eyes search the darkness. London is quiet, but only for now. The city waits, the fog watches, and somewhere beneath it all, the plague moves with patient, invisible purpose. Night has come fully to Bishopsgate, bringing with it a fog so dense that it seems to press against the bones of the city. The cobblestones vanish beneath its muted grey, buildings blur into indistinct shapes, and the glow of lanterns is swallowed almost instantly. London exhales a low, weary sigh, and the streets are empty except for the carts. At first, Only one moves along the lane, drawn by hands calloused from years of hauling heavy loads. The lantern swings at its side, casting a sickly circle of light across wet stone, illuminating a single path through the fog. But soon, another appears, and another. 1, 2, 3 carts, each emerging from the shadows of alleys, each creaking in rhythm like the heartbeat of a city under duress. They glide forward slowly, deliberately, as if moving to a tune known only to the fog. The carts are loaded with more than wood or barrels. They carry the dead, bodies wrapped in coarse cloth, heavy with fever, their faces frozen mid-expression, the last terror etched into pale skin. The horse-drawn wagons of old are gone. The living now pull the weight of the city's tragedy themselves. Every creak of a wheel, every dragging of a rope over stone, resonates through the lanes like a tolling bell, echoing down passages that have long since emptied. Behind the carts, shadows follow. Rats move boldly through the mist, climbing along the sides of the wagons, disappearing beneath them, only to reappear elsewhere. They are small, agile, unafraid, carrying the city's invisible passengers onward in silence. The few windows that remain open reveal wide, horrified eyes pressed to the glass, faces pale and silent. No one dares step into the streets to witness the procession more closely. They watch instead from shuttered frames, their breaths misting the panes in tiny, trembling clouds. A cart stops before a boarded house. The workers, gloves slick with sweat and fear, lift their burden, maneuvering the cloth-wrapped bodies with care that is almost reverent. The fog curls around them, carrying the scent of rot and faint iron into the street, and the city seems to shiver in recognition. The boards of the house creak under the weight of the dead being laid within. Inside, the family who survived watches from behind the slats, holding their children close, eyes wide with terror and disbelief. The cries they dare to stifle are swallowed by the fog. Another cart rolls into the square. Its wheels moan, scraping over uneven stones. A lantern swings violently, casting the outlines of the dead in brief. Flickering flashes, turning limbs into shadows that crawl across walls. The weight of each body is mirrored by the weight pressing on the air itself, the city inhaling slowly, deliberately, as though bracing against a storm it can neither see nor escape. By midnight, the carts have multiplied along every street. Their passage is mechanical, relentless, a quiet assertion of the city's surrender. Windows remain closed, doors remain bolted. Children huddle beneath blankets, mothers clutching them so tightly that the skin grows cold beneath their palms. Even the rats pause occasionally, as though aware that the night has become too heavy for movement alone. In Holborn, in Whitechapel, in every corner where life once thrived, the sound of carts echoes faintly through the fog. Creak, scrape, pause. The procession will not end. It will continue until the city is emptied of those it once held, until London learns what it means to carry its dead through the streets without complaint. And through it all the fog presses, thick and patient, absorbing the sounds, the smells, the final tremors of life, leaving only the carts and the hollow rhythm of the city that has begun to surrender to its own decay. By the time dawn struggles through the heavy fog, the streets of Bishopsgate bear evidence of the city's slow unraveling. The cobblestones glisten with a sheen that is not dew. They are slick with something warmer, darker, glinting faintly in the muted light as though the stones themselves remember the lives that have passed over them. The scent that rises from the streets is sweet, metallic, clinging a thick, unyielding perfume that presses into the nostrils and clogs the lungs. The red stains on the paving stones speak without words. They are thin streaks along the edges of alleyways, splashed at doorways, pooled where carts have stopped and rolled onward. Each mark is a whisper of fear, a testament to the last moments of those who once moved through the city with careless steps, unaware of the creeping presence that now claims them. Even the rats skirt these stains with care, their tiny paws leaving no trace as though they recognize the ground beneath is sacred with loss. A man, trudges along the lane, his cloak damp from the lingering mist. His name is Thomas, a baker whose ovens have long grown cold. He had been awake before the fog settled, rising early to see if bread could still be baked, if London could still taste its ordinary comforts. But the red stains stop him mid-step. He lowers his eyes and sees the path he has always walked, now etched with echoes of something he cannot bring himself to name. He bends to touch one of the streaks with a gloved hand. The stone beneath is cold, unyielding, but the sight of crimson sends a shiver up his spine. It is the color of life, drained away too quickly, leaving only residue. Somewhere nearby, a shutter creaks. He straightens, head snapping toward the sound, but sees only the fog, writhing like smoke over the city's bones. Along the edges of the street, the carts from the previous night have disappeared, their burdens claimed by the sealed houses that now line the lane like tombstones. But the traces of what they carried remain red stains, faintly glimmering in the weak light, each telling the story of a body wrapped too hastily, a life extinguished too soon. A basket lies abandoned near the curb, tipped over, its contents ruined and scattered, flecked with the same hue that marks the stones. Thomas lifts his gaze and notices the windows above. Shutters remain closed, doors bolted. Faces peek briefly from behind, cracks in wood and glass eyes wide, fearful, waiting. The city watches itself now, and in its reflection, sees the evidence of its own surrender. The streets are a tapestry of decay, each mark a stitch binding London tighter into its own despair. A cat slips silently across the stones, its paws careful, deliberate. It pauses at a dark streak near a doorway, sniffing the air, ears twitching. The fog curls around it, thick and patient. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls faintly, almost apologetically, announcing the hour, though the sound carries the hollow weight of absence. Thomas continues along the lane, careful to avoid the deepest stains. Though he knows there is no escaping them, every step is a reminder. The city is bleeding, and each droplet marks not just those who are gone, but the living too. For London has begun to teach its residents that survival is fragile, and death moves quietly along familiar paths. By midday, the paving stones tell a story the city can no longer hide, a story of fear, of bodies gone, of life interrupted in its most ordinary rhythms. And London, wrapped in fog and silence, listens to its own memory, stained in red, as if the ground itself remembers every soul it has lost. In the dim light of St. Bartholomew's parish office, the clerk sits hunched over a ledger that has begun to feel heavier with each passing hour. His quill scratches across the page, wet ink smearing faintly, as though even the words are reluctant to remain. The room smells of damp parchment, tallow from the guttering candle, and the faint, clinging sweetness of decay that has begun to press its way through the walls. Samuel, the clerk, has recorded births, deaths, and marriages for decades, each entry carefully noted, each name a thread in the tapestry of the city. But now, the ledger groans under a different weight, one that ink and paper were never meant to bear. Each line he writes carries the name of those extinguished before their time, of families that have vanished into shuttered homes, of children who will never learn the prayers he writes by hand. He pauses mid-sentence, hand hovering over the page. His eyes trace the lines below names stacked in mournful rhythm, and he feels the ledger's pulse as if it were alive. Each letter, a heartbeat. The candle flickers, casting the shadow of his hand across the page. It stretches unnaturally long, touching names he has yet to write, whispering of those yet to come. Outside, the fog presses against the windows, thick and humid, carrying with it the faint toll of distant bells, the scrape of carts over cobblestones, the low, guttural cries that rise from alleys where the sick hide in the shadows. The city itself seems to lean against the walls of the office, breathing heavily, watching him, waiting for the next name to be inscribed. Samuel dips his quill in the ink once more. His fingers tremble. He has counted the dead in his mind countless times, and yet the tally feels infinite. Each name etched onto the page is accompanied by a memory he cannot shake. A mother's whispered plea, a child's last laugh, a father's struggle to hold his family together, even as the sickness steals them away. He writes, mechanically, but his eyes sting with unshed tears. A sudden gust rattles the window. He starts, drops the quill for a moment, then grasps it again. The fog clings to the glass, obscuring the street beyond. Samuel knows he is not safe even here. The sickness creeps through the city, silent and patient, and he can smell its approach in the damp wood of the shutters, in the mouldy corners of the office, in the faint warmth of his own breath that seems too close to his lungs. He turns the page and writes a single word, almost as a prayer, unknown. Beneath it, he leaves space, knowing he will return to it, knowing more names will follow, names he cannot yet witness, but which the city insists must be recorded. A sound rises from below, soft, uneven, almost imperceptible. He freezes. Footsteps? No. A cough? Perhaps. He leans closer to the window, pressing his face against the cool glass. The fog swirls below, obscuring what remains of the market street, and he glimpses a figure in a red cloak passing silently by. The bell tolls again, distant, hollow, as if marking not the hour but the accumulation of loss. Samuel closes the ledger slowly, as though the act might contain the weight within. But it does not. The names, the stories, the silent deaths press against his mind like the fog against the walls. He rises, stretching tired limbs that have grown accustomed to hours bent over ink and paper, and looks out into the mist. The city waits, silent but insistent. He knows he must continue, for the ledger is all that remains, and the city, bleeding quietly beneath its fog, will not forget. The streets of Bishopsgate are empty now, save for the fog that curls around the eaves and drifts along the cobblestones like a living thing. Every step echoes oddly, as if the city itself is listening, judging, waiting. Lamps swing gently on their iron hooks, casting circles of pale light that barely reach the edge of the alleys. The faint odor of rot and smoke lingers in the air, clinging to the stones and the wood of shuttered doors. From a corner near the wharf, a lone watchman moves quickly, cloak wrapped tightly against his shoulders. His boots scrape against the wet stones, uneven and hurried. He glances over his shoulder constantly, eyes darting into the fog, into the shadows of doorways, under the leaning eaves where rats and vermin creep. Each sound an overturned barrel, a distant cough, a shutter banging against a frame makes him startle. His pulse hammers in his throat. His breath comes sharp and quick. This watchman, Thomas Carrow, had been tasked with patrolling the district, marking houses suspected of sickness, ensuring that families stayed behind locked doors. He had once walked these streets with pride, believing in duty and the fragile order of the city. But tonight, the fog presses too heavily, the streets seem too silent, and the weight of what he has witnessed bears down on him like a physical force. He stops beneath a shuttered window and listens. A faint cough rises from behind the boards. A child? A woman? A man? He cannot tell, and he does not want to. The cough echoes faintly, mingling with the soft moan of the wind against the eaves. His hand tightens on the staff he carries, knuckles white. Then, the distant sound of a hammer strikes his ears, boards being nailed into place. Another home sealed. He knows the family inside will not see tomorrow. His stomach twists. He has seen too many sealed doors, too many bodies carried away silently, too many streets emptied by fear and sickness. The city itself has begun to lean into despair. A sudden shuffling sound from a nearby alley makes him flinch. He spins, staff raised, heart hammering. Nothing, only the fog, only the sense that something is waiting just beyond sight. He hears whispers not human, perhaps imagined, perhaps carried by the fog, but whispers of warning, of menace, of inevitable loss. And then he runs, not carefully, not silently. He bolts, boots striking the cobblestones in uneven cadence, staff clattering against stone and timber. He turns corners without looking, driven by a sudden, inexplicable terror. Every alley seems longer than it should, every shadow deeper. The fog twists around him, pulling at cloak and hair. He stumbles over a loose stone, catching himself on a lamp-post, and hears the hollow scrape of a cartwheel far behind, though he knows no cart follows. He does not stop until the shutters of every house appear closed, every door sealed, every light extinguished. He does not pause to catch his breath. He does not dare glance back. The city seems to shift around him, streets bending and stretching unnaturally, as if he has entered a place no longer bound by the rules of the living. Finally, he reaches a quiet corner, panting, shaking, sweat beading at his hairline. He presses his back to the wall, trying to calm the racing of his heart. The fog presses close, curling against his face, whispering faintly in a language he cannot understand. The city is still, but it watches, and the watchman knows, now, that it will not wait for anyone. London is already claiming him. By the dead of night, Holborn Lane feels abandoned, though it is not. The fog presses thick against the leaning buildings, curling into corners where darkness has always lingered, weaving a damp, choking shroud that carries the odor of soot, rot, and something far sweeter, far fouler, death. The cobblestones glisten faintly in the dim light, slick from evening mist, but they are not wet with rain. They are wet with the residue of lives extinguished too soon, the echoes of the city's heartbeat now silent. The lane is empty of movement, yet alive in its own way. Doors hang closed, bolted and barred, windows shuttered, curtains drawn tight against the eyes of the living. Even the rats, emboldened elsewhere, skirt these streets cautiously, noses twitching, ears flattened, aware that whatever claimed this lane was neither temporary nor kind. A child had once run here, chasing a hoop along the stones, laughter spilling into the fog. A baker had placed bread on the doorstep, trusting neighbors to take only what they needed. A milkmaid had delivered pails of fresh milk before sunrise. All these sounds, once natural and ordinary, have vanished, replaced by a stillness that presses against the lungs, a silence that hums faintly with unspoken terror. A lone candle flickers in the corner of a collapsed doorway. Its light stretches across the wet stones, revealing an overturned chair, a basket spilled with bruised apples, the cracked remnants of a pot long since abandoned. There is no one to write the items, no one to sweep the floor or tend the fire. The lane itself seems to inhale, holding the remnants of life in place as though frozen in memory. From one shuttered window, a face peers briefly, then retreats, eyes wide, a hand pressed to the glass. The family inside huddles together, breath mingling in the cold air that leaks through cracks, yet no one dares step outside. They know what has happened here. They do not need to see it to understand. A sudden creak interrupts the quiet, a shutter swinging in the fog, loosened by the wind. It is a small sound, but in the absence of all else, it carries like thunder. A rat scurries from beneath a pile of refuse, pausing at a puddle that reflects faint orange from a distant lantern. The creature noses the surface, ears twitching, before darting into the shadows. The smell is thick here, unmistakable. The coppery tang of blood, faint now, mixed with the sour sweetness of sweat and decay. It clings to the walls, the cobblestones, even the fog itself. One could imagine inhaling it and tasting the fear of 100 households, the resignation of those who have realized too late that the city no longer belongs to the living alone. A cart groans distantly as it passes another lane nearby, its cargo hidden beneath coarse cloths. The sound is hollow and slow, the wheels dragging across uneven stones, marking the passage of another family claimed by the invisible hand of the plague. The lane absorbs the noise, swallowing it as it has swallowed the lives once resident within its boundaries. The candle guttering in the doorway finally dies. A rat slips silently into the shadows. The wind presses harder, carrying the scent of the abandoned, of absence, of streets stripped bare of life. Holborn Lane is empty now. It has always been alive in its own rhythm, but tonight that rhythm is gone. Every window shuttered, every door nailed, every footprint frozen in fear. London has learned a lesson. Not all streets will survive. Not all homes will shelter. And some lanes, like this one, will remember the living only in silence. In a dimly lit room at the far end of Bishopsgate, the scribe sits hunched over a desk of warped oak, quill trembling between fingers stiff with cold and exhaustion. The candle beside him gutters weakly, casting long, flickering shadows across parchment stacked in uneven piles. Each page is inked with names that carry the weight of the city, the silent tally of the living claimed by fever, suffocated by fear, swallowed by a plague that London cannot yet name aloud. The room smells of old paper, tallow smoke, and the faint, lingering sweetness of decay. It presses in against the scribe's shoulders as he works, a tangible reminder that the city outside is hollowing hour by hour. Each scratch of the quill seems to echo unnaturally, carried along by the fog that seeps beneath the shuttered window. It whispers of shuttered doors, of boards hammered tight, of children hiding beneath beds, of mothers kneeling silently beside bodies that will never rise again. The scribe pauses, leaning back on the stiff chair. His eyes sweep across the names already written. Row upon row, they stretch endlessly. A thin river of ink carrying the dead through a ledger meant to preserve memory but failing to keep it from vanishing. He imagines their faces blurred in candlelight, pale, frozen mid-breath, and feels the weight of each soul pressing against his chest. His hands tremble, not from fatigue alone, but from the recognition that the city itself is keeping count, and he is only its reluctant witness. Outside, the streets press close, heavy with fog. The faint clatter of a cart echoes from a distance, slow, methodical, carrying its burdens along cobblestones, slick with moisture and unseen stains. Rats skitter across the threshold, halting briefly to sniff at the stale, iron-laced air, then vanish beneath doorways and refuse piles. London breathes in these moments of absence, and the scribe imagines the city leaning over him, waiting for the ink to dry, the names to settle, the tally to grow. He dips the quill into ink once more, watching the dark liquid form a bead at its tip. Each name he writes feels like a verdict, a sentence passed upon houses and families, streets and alleyways. He pauses as he lifts the first few letters, noticing the way the candlelight stretches shadows across the page, turning letters into elongated spectres. One line ends, and he hesitates, quill hovering over the next. He knows the tally is far from complete, but even the act of writing feels like surrender. A distant bell tolls, faint and hollow, vibrating through the fog like a pulse beneath the city's skin. The scribe's hand falters. He listens, counting the tolls, feeling the rhythm of loss. Somewhere beyond the fog, a door slams. Somewhere else, a child cries. Somewhere else still, a cart groans under a hidden burden. He leans closer to the parchment, inscribing another name, Eleanor Greer. His hand presses the quill harder than necessary, scratching the ink into the fibers of the paper. He whispers it aloud, softly, a prayer, a recognition, a surrender. The candle flickers violently and then steadies, as if the flame itself shivers at the weight of the words. Outside, London continues to watch, silent, patient, relentless. Every name written in the scribe's ledger is mirrored in the streets, in shuttered windows, in empty hearths, in the fog that clings to every corner. The tally grows, yet the city knows it will never be complete. There will always be more names, more homes, more streets surrendered to the silent, invisible hand that tightens over the city's throat. The scribe leans back, quill poised, eyes heavy. His candle burns low. The fog presses closer still. He whispers another name into the gloom, and London listens. Evening stretches like a bruise across Bishopsgate, and the market squares lie deserted, their stalls sagging, their wares abandoned to rot. Only one figure remains, a small, stooped woman named Agatha, known to neighbors and weary travelers alike as the last bread seller in this section of the city. Her cart, wooden and scarred from years of hauling loaves along wet stones, sits heavily in the fog, lanterns swinging faintly, casting trembling circles of light that barely touch the mist. Agatha moves slowly, each step deliberate, boots wet from the mist that seeps into every crevice. She glances down at her loaves, wrapped in coarse cloth, and sighs softly. They are warm, the crusts browned, the smell faintly sweet, yet she knows there will be no buyers tonight. The streets are empty, doors are sealed, and windows reveal only shadowed faces that peer briefly, then vanish. London has withdrawn into itself, leaving her alone to bear the remnants of a life that persists stubbornly, uselessly, against the city's slow decay. The fog presses closer around her, clinging to her shawl and the folds of her apron. Its damp breath mingles with the smell of baking bread, a strange combination that carries through the narrow lane like an invitation and a warning. Agatha's hands, calloused from years of kneading and shaping dough, tremble slightly as she lifts the cloth from one of the baskets. The loaves inside are perfect, round, warm, fragrant, but she knows the perfection is meaningless. The city has no mouths left willing or able to taste them. She wheels the cart slowly along the uneven stones, the lantern swinging to cast elongated shadows of herself and the wagon. Every step echoes, sharp and lonely, through alleys that once hummed with life. She pauses at a corner where the faintest echo of children's laughter might have reached on another day. Nothing moves now, only the fog, curling and twisting, filling the streets with a heavy, expectant hush. From a shuttered window, a hand presses against the glass, a fleeting gesture of recognition. Agatha nods softly, though the figure disappears immediately, swallowed by the darkness. She continues, careful not to glance too long at the empty houses. The smell of decay grows stronger as she passes a row of shuttered homes, lingering hints of fever, of sweat and sickness, of warmth gone cold. Rats dart under her cart, bold and unafraid, sniffing at the crates and baskets with a familiarity that makes her shiver. At the end of the lane, she pauses. Her breath mists in the air, catching the dim light. The silence presses around her like a living thing, patient and merciless. She sets the cart down, arranging the loaves neatly, though no one will eat them. The sound of her fingers against the wooden handles is loud in the emptiness, a small, fragile claim of existence in a city that has begun to erase itself. A distant bell tolls once, faint and hollow, carrying the weight of homes already sealed, families already lost, streets already emptied. Agatha clutches her shawl tighter around her shoulders, shivering in the damp, metallic air. She whispers a prayer for those who once bought bread here, for the hands that kneaded dough, for the mouths now silent. She lifts the cloth from the basket again. The loaves are warm, fragrant, perfect. But the city does not stir. The fog curls around her, patient, and the rats pause, watching. London breathes around her, waiting for the next step, the next sound, the next soul to succumb. And Agatha, last of the bread sellers, remains, alone, unwavering, a solitary sentinel against a city falling quietly into decay. The fog has thickened along the Thames, rolling over the river like a slow tide of ash. Its tendrils curl around mooring posts, slip under shuttered warehouses, and press against the wooden planks of the wharf, cold and damp. Lanterns, hung by ropes that creak in the night, sway slightly with the touch of a wind that carries both river mist and the faint, metallic tang of decay. They glow weakly, amber flames flickering and stretching against the encroaching fog, illuminating the faces of men who have long since learned to fear the night. They are the dockmen, few in number, their bodies thin and posture bowed beneath the weight of months spent in anticipation and dread. Each carries a lantern, their hands steady only by force of habit. Their eyes dart through the haze, following shapes that vanish, listening for the faintest ripple in the water or the softest echo of movement across the planks. They have seen too much to trust the familiar. Now the simple rhythm of a rope drawn, taut, the moan of a creaking post, the subtle splash of something too large to be a rat. The river, once alive with boats, barges, and the laughter of sailors, now lies still and almost oppressive, as if holding its breath alongside the city. Its surface glimmers faintly, reflecting the lantern light like fragments of broken glass scattered across ink. Here and there, discarded barrels float past, remnants of trade abandoned. The water smells of salt, stagnation, and the faintly sweet iron that rises from the hidden depths, the telltale perfume of what has already passed beneath unseen waves. A man bends to adjust a lantern hanging from a timber beam, his hands trembling despite the gloves. The wick flares briefly, casting grotesque shadows across the warehouse walls. Shapes appear and vanish in the fog rats, perhaps, or something larger moving under the waterline. He straightens, eyes narrowing, breath trembling as he hears the faint scrape of a boat keel along the dock. The lanterns stretch their fragile light across the planks, but the fog consumes it greedily. It twists and coils between the posts, wrapping around rope and nail, around hands and boots, whispering in a language older than the city itself. One of the dockmen coughs, softly, and the sound is magnified in the stillness, echoing unnaturally against the river, reaching the ears of no one who might answer. At the far end of the wharf, a solitary boat drifts slowly, its hull scraped by the tide, the cloth covering its cargo rising and falling with a ghostly cadence. No oars, no voices, only the soft slap of water against wood and the faint, rhythmic creak of timbers. The men grip their lanterns tighter, swaying slightly as though bracing against some invisible force. A faint, distant bell tolls somewhere upriver. The sound is hollow, carried on the fog, signaling not an hour, but a reckoning. The dockmen exchange glances, unspoken words hanging like smoke between them. Each knows the weight of the night, that the river carries more than water, that each floating barrel, each drifting plank, might hide a body, a secret, a trace of the plague that devours London, silently. The fog curls tighter, climbing over the lanterns, twisting the light into thin, trembling fingers. Rats move along the edges of the planks, bold and silent, their small shadows flitting across wet timber. Somewhere below, in the water, a faint movement stirs, too fluid to be human, too deliberate to be random. The men shiver, not from cold, but from the awareness that the city, the river, and the night itself are aligned against them. By dawn, when the fog finally begins to lift, the lanterns remain, swinging gently in empty air. The dock is silent. The river shimmers faintly, reflecting nothing, holding its secrets beneath dark waters. And London, pressed against its banks, listens and waits, knowing that the night is only a prelude to the slow, creeping advance of the plague. Down a narrow alley tucked between two leaning warehouses, a house sits heavier than the rest, its timbers sagging under years of neglect. The number painted above the door has long since faded, leaving only a ghostly trace of white against blackened wood. Locals speak of it quietly, if at all, calling it the House of 13 Silence, not because it was once quiet, but because the stillness within now weighs like stone, pressing against every wall, every floorboard, every heart that dares approach. Inside, the air is thick with heat and decay. Dust motes hang in the candlelight like suspended motes of ash, stirring only when disturbed by the smallest motion. A faint, sweet odor lingers in the corners, pungent and sour, clinging to curtains, furniture, even the air itself. It is the scent of fevered breath, of bodies long drained of warmth, of desperation folded into the very rafters. Every object in the room seems to tremble under the weight of absence. A mother lies propped against a wall, her arms curled protectively around her youngest child. Their faces are pale, lips cracked, eyes hollow and distant. She breathes shallowly, counting each inhalation as though it might stave off the inevitable, as though it could hold back the darkness pressing in through the shutters. Outside, the fog presses at the windows, coiling like a living thing, whispering to the panes, testing the cracks, smelling the despair within. The father sits slumped beside the hearth, his hands trembling as he clutches a worn piece of cloth, wiping at sweat that is neither warmth nor comfort but the residue of the fever creeping steadily through their home. His eyes shift to the ceiling, following the slow crawl of shadows cast by the flickering candle. He does not speak. He cannot. Words are unnecessary in a house that already knows silence so deep it presses against the eardrums and nests in the chest. The children lie still, curled beneath blankets too thin for the cold fog that slips under the door. Their small breaths rise and fall in uneven rhythm, like tiny boats tossed on an invisible tide. One cough escapes a harsh, rasping sound, and it is immediately swallowed by the room, leaving only a residual tremor that rattles the wooden frame. Outside, the street is quiet. The market has vanished. The carts of the dead have moved on. Lanterns swing gently in empty alleys, painting thin circles of light across cobblestones slick with dew and unseen stains. London listens from its corners, patient and merciless, as the House of 13 Silence holds its inhabitants in suspended terror. A rat scurries across the threshold, bold now that the living have retreated further into their own shadows. It pauses beside the mother, sniffing the warm, sour air. She does not see it. She does not move. She is frozen in the act of trying to preserve life, though life itself has grown tenuous, threadbare, like the fraying edges of the blankets that cover her children. A distant bell tolls, faint, hollow, removed from time. It echoes along the empty streets and down the river, brushing the fog like a warning. The mother leans further over her child, whispering a name, a prayer, a plea she does not expect to answer. The House of 13 Silence waits. It has always waited. The walls breathe slowly, in rhythm with the fading breaths of its inhabitants. Every creak of timber, every flicker of candle, every muffled cough becomes a note in a mournful symphony the city alone understands. And London, watching from behind shuttered windows and doors barred tight, knows that it is only a matter of hours before the silence claims all within. The mayor of Bishopsgate, a man once proud and deliberate, now moves through the empty streets like a ghost tethered to the weight of his own office. His footsteps, once authoritative and measured, echo strangely across the wet cobblestones, swallowed almost immediately by the thick, clinging fog that presses against the eaves and walls of shuttered homes. The city itself seems to recoil from him, as if aware of the futility of authority in a place where doors are nailed shut and voices are silenced. He walks slowly, hands clasped behind his back, eyes scanning the narrow lane for signs of life. There are none. Not a single merchant calls out, not a cart creaks, not a child's laugh pierces the chill air. Only the soft, metallic tang of decay rides the wind, carrying with it the invisible toll of fever and the quiet weight of countless vanished souls. Even the river, visible between the buildings, moves with a sluggish hesitation, reflecting the half-light of lanterns abandoned hours ago. Each step feels heavier than the last. His boots sink slightly into puddles formed in depressions along the worn stones, carrying the faintest traces of blood, mud, and spilled produce. He cannot tell which belongs to the living, which to the dead. The fog dances over the surfaces of overturned barrels and splintered crates, weaving a pattern of shadow and light that seems to mock the authority he once wielded with certainty. As he passes a narrow alley, a rat darts across the street, pausing only to sniff at the lingering warmth of what may have been a human hand. The mayor flinches instinctively, his eyes narrowing, but he continues. He knows the city has already claimed these alleys. The inhabitants have withdrawn, leaving only echoes behind. Every window shuttered, every door bolted, every chimney dark, all witness to the creeping, merciless grip of the plague. He stops before the entrance to St. Mildred's parish. The boards across the door gleam faintly in the weak lantern light. The smell of rot and damp hangs in the air, thick enough to make him gag slightly. He leans closer, hand resting lightly against the doorframe. He can feel the faint vibration of the wind against the boards, hear the distant scrape of timbers settling, and just for a moment the muffled cough of someone alive inside. His chest tightens. The sight and sound are proof enough that death has already arrived, but mercy lingers still in the shadows. The mayor moves on. His path takes him past boarded-up shops and empty squares, each step quieter than the last, each echo swallowed more quickly by the fog. He knows he is walking not to govern, but to witness. The city no longer answers to edicts, proclamations, or authority. It answers only to fear, to sickness, and to the invisible hand that has begun to rearrange the lives of its people. He pauses mid-stride at a crossroads. The fog curls around him, pressing close, weaving through the folds of his cloak. The soft whisper of distant bells drifts from the far side of the river, hollow and slow. It is the only sound besides the occasional scrape of a rat along the wall and the groan of timber settling in abandoned houses. His own footsteps seem to vanish beneath the pressure of silence, leaving him unmoored in a city that no longer recognizes the living. The mayor continues walking, disappearing into the fog, his figure stretching and shrinking in the dim light. Behind him, the city exhales, and the streets remember. Each step he has taken the steps of a man who can no longer control what is claimed, only bear witness. London waits, patient and indifferent, as the plague moves steadily through alleys, homes, and hearts, leaving behind the echo of authority swallowed by fear. Along the narrowing lanes of Bishopsgate, the fog hangs low and sluggish, thick as wool, curling around doorways and settling in the hollows between the stones. It presses against the faces of those who still move through the city, muffling sound and scent, blurring edges, and stretching time into something slow and unkind. In the shuttered homes, behind bolted doors and nailed windows, mothers sit, still and quiet, listening to a world that has already begun to forget them. Marjorie sits on a wooden stool beside the hearth of her small home, hands folded over her knees. The fire burns low, producing little warmth, though the smoke curls and stings her eyes. She rocks her youngest child gently in her arms, whispering the same prayers she has been repeating for hours, her voice thin and wavering. Outside, the fog presses against the windowpane, tracing the outline of her hand like a shadow that knows too much. She flinches as a distant cough drifts up from the street, carried in the damp air. It is a cough that speaks of houses already lost, of lives that have ended quietly, unnoticed, swallowed by silence. Across the street, another mother sits in a chair too tall for her short frame, elbows resting on her knees. Her hands tremble as she lifts a cup of water to her lips. The liquid is cold, almost icy, yet she drinks, shivering as it slides down. Every few minutes she leans over to check her sleeping child, whose shallow breaths rise and fall like fragile tides. She has not dared move beyond the room for food or firewood for days, relying on what she could carry quietly from the kitchen. She is alone in this vigilance, but she knows she is not the only one. Outside, the fog shifts with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Lanterns sway faintly in the distance, their light broken and flickering, revealing glimpses of empty streets and abandoned carts. The wind carries the faint metallic tang of sickness, drifting into homes, curling beneath doors, brushing against the faces of mothers who hold their children as tightly as their own fear. Every footstep from a cart or a distant figure is magnified, each scrape of timber, each sigh of the wind a potential harbinger. The mothers wait, not for the city to heal, not for the streets to fill with life, but for what they cannot prevent. For the quiet claim of fever, the subtle reach of death into homes where prayers and whispered songs are all that remain. They measure each hour in breaths and in the shallow noises their children make, each cough or whimper a reminder that the plague has already entered, and yet they remain, unwilling to abandon the fragile hearth of what little life persists. In a small corner, A girl presses her face to the window, eyes wide, catching a glimpse of shadow moving in the fog. It is a cart, distant, slow, carrying its hidden burden. Her mother pulls her back quickly, hands shaking as she presses her child into her chest. The girl's small heartbeat thrums against the adult's chest, a faint echo of hope amid pervasive dread. The fog thickens further, pressing through the cracks in the street and the corners of homes. Rats scuttle along the walls and under doors, bold in their new dominion. The city exhales in soft, damp whispers, carrying the smell of wet timber, rot, and fever. And yet the mothers wait. They wait in the dim glow of their hearths, in the tight clutch of blankets and arms, in the rhythm of prayer and whispered names, holding fast to life in a city that has begun to forget how to care for its children. London watches them in silence. The night listens, and the fog waits, patient and unrelenting. The dawn rises grey over Bishopsgate, but it is not a dawn. It is a half-light pressed through a blanket of fog, damp and heavy, seeping into every crevice of the city. Streets are quiet, shuttered windows hold their breath, and the wind carries no familiar songs of London waking. The birds are silent. The river moves sluggishly, reflecting a pallid sky. There is a hollowness to this morning, a subtle shift that can be felt in the bones, a heaviness that has no name but is understood. At St. Leonard's, the bell tower stands motionless. The rope hangs slack, swinging slightly in the faint current of wind. Normally, it would have tolled by this hour, calling the city to prayer, announcing the hour, reminding the living that life still persists. But today there is no sound, no peal, no reverberation, no voice of bronze, only the fog pressing close, damp against the stone, carrying the faint scent of lime and rot. Brother Hale, the bell ringer, leans against the tower wall, shoulders slumped. His hands are trembling, pale and shaking, as if the morning itself has stolen their strength. He had risen before dawn, as always, expecting the rope to pull easily, expecting the bell to sing clearly across the fog, but the rope had resisted. The bell had groaned faintly and then stilled. The city's pulse no longer beats to its rhythm. He knows now that it will not. Across the street, windows creak open just a fraction, faces peering through the cracked slats. Families gather silently, pressing children to their chests. They have listened for the sound of the bell for years, for generations, relying on it to structure the day, to remind them that the world moves on despite its troubles. Today, it is absent, and its absence spreads more terror than any toll ever could. A mother whispers a name to her child, her voice breaking, and the child curls further into her chest, sensing the weight of loss already pressing against them. Down the lane, the carts that have carried bodies in the night pause silently. The drivers, thin and weary, grip the handles, watching the fog with narrowed eyes. Even the rats seem to hesitate, sensing that something is out of balance. The streets themselves appear to hold their breath, stone and timber waiting, watching, as though aware of a profound, quiet shift in the city. In the market square, the empty stalls stand like tombstones. Bread rots untouched in baskets, vegetables blacken in the damp, and the air carries the faintest tang of sweat and iron. The fog wraps around every object, every stone, every abandoned cart, imbuing them with a presence that seems almost alive. A distant cough breaks the silence, jagged and ragged, swallowed almost immediately by the fog. Hale steps back from the rope, head bowed. The city has taught him something in the absence of sound. Authority, ritual, and order no longer govern here. The plague moves by its own rules, slow and relentless, marking the streets and houses, choosing the living and leaving the dead in equal measure. And London listens, hollowed, still, and patient. The morning has arrived without its bell. The city breathes in silence, and in that silence, everyone knows that nothing will ever sound the same again. The morning fog has lifted only slightly, leaving Bishopsgate and its crooked alleys slick and shimmering under a dull, muted light. By mid-morning, A fine, cold rain begins to fall, almost imperceptible at first, a soft, persistent drizzle that thickens with time. It seeps into every crevice, drips from sagging rooftops, pools along the edges of the cobblestones. The sound is faint, almost meditative, yet carries the weight of inevitability, pressing down upon the city as if attempting to wash away something far too stubborn to be removed. The rain does not cleanse, it cannot. It carries with it the memory of neglect, the faint tang of iron and decay, the clinging sweetness of fever that has saturated the air for weeks. It drapes itself over abandoned carts, soaked barrels, and overturned baskets of rotting vegetables, transforming them into small islands of futility, glinting in the half-light. The streets seem to absorb it, each droplet pressing against stone and timber, filling every hollow where life once stirred with a quiet, relentless sorrow. In one corner, a mother leans against the doorway of her shuttered home, the rain soaking her cloak. Her hands are wrapped tightly around the shoulders of her children, eyes scanning the mist-streaked street for signs of anyone still moving, anyone still breathing. The water drips down the folds of her shawl, running into her hair, running down her cheeks. Each droplet is heavy, tangible, carrying the chill of the season and the weight of grief. She whispers a prayer, soft and broken, into the damp air, and the rain swallows it immediately. Along the riverbank, the Thames reflects the pale grey of sky and fog, rippling faintly under the relentless fall of water. A lone boat drifts slowly, its hull slick and dark, carrying a burden that cannot be named. Rats skitter along the planks of the wharf, bold yet careful, pausing only briefly to sniff the wet air before vanishing again into the shadows. The city watches, itself in these reflections, and in them sees not vitality, but exhaustion, the exhaustion of a population retreating into shuttered homes, the exhaustion of a city being hollowed from within. At St. Bartholomew's, the candlelight flickers weakly through narrow cracks in the windows. The priests and parish clerks huddle in silence, listening to the rain against the roof. It is rhythmic, hypnotic, yet it brings no comfort. It cannot cleanse the city's sins, cannot wash away the fevered air that presses against the walls, cannot restore what has already been lost. Each droplet that slides down the wooden panes carries with it a quiet accusation. The streets are full of absence, and no amount of water can fill them. A small child, left momentarily at a window, watches the wet streets, and feels a strange fascination, a beauty intertwined with fear. Every puddle mirrors the grey sky and the swaying shapes of lamplights. The reflection is broken, fragmented, just as the city itself is fragmented, as if the world has been shattered into pieces too small to mend. The rain continues to fall, cold and unyielding, soaking everything it touches. It slips beneath doors, seeps into cellars, slicks the stones where the carts of the dead have passed, leaving behind only a faint trace of what once existed. The city inhales the rain, tasting its own decay. London knows that the cleansing is only an illusion. The plague remains, patient, watching, moving silently beneath the damp, beneath the fog, beneath the stillness of every empty street. And the rain keeps falling. It washes nothing. It remembers everything. By mid-morning, the fog has lifted slightly, revealing the warped timbers of Bishopsgate and the narrow alleyways choked with debris, abandoned baskets, and the lingering smell of rot. The streets are slick from rain, reflective like dull mirrors, capturing only the faint glow of lanterns that sway weakly in the morning breeze. The boards that once sealed homes are splintered and dark with moisture, their nails rusted, their wood swollen with damp. It is here, in these quiet moments of reluctant clarity, that carpenters move cautiously, lifting the first boards from a house that has been silent for days. Their hands are steady but deliberate. They know what may lie beyond the threshold. The air pressed against the doors is heavy, clinging, filled with the faint, pungent sweetness of fever and decay. Each plank they remove releases a breath from the house, a sigh that carries the weight of a family's absence, or what remains of it. The men work quietly, almost reverently, as if their labor is both sacrament and burden. Every nail they pull, every board they pry, seems to resonate with the invisible pulse of the city itself. Inside, the house smells of stale air, human sweat, and the metallic tang of sickness. Dust motes hang in the shafts of light that slice through the gaps in the shutters, spinning lazily as if caught in a suspended moment. A chair lies toppled in the corner, a table overturned, remnants of meals gone cold. The faint echo of a cough drifts from the upper floor, rasping and irregular, a sound that freezes the carpenters mid-motion. They exchange tense glances but continue, knowing hesitation carries its own peril. Upstairs, the bedroom is a scene of quiet devastation. Sheets lie tangled around small bodies, faces pale and strained, lips cracked, breaths shallow. A mother leans against the wall, eyes wide, clutching her youngest child as though her grip alone might stave off the fever pressing against the household. Her husband lies slumped, nearby, shoulders curved and still. The house has held its breath for days, and in the lifting of the boards, it exhales a whisper of despair that fills the alley with quiet menace. Outside, neighbors peek cautiously from shuttered windows, eyes wide, breaths held. They have watched the boards go up, have seen the hammer strike again and again, but they do not intervene. Each house is a small universe of horror, and London has taught them that survival lies in watching silently, never stepping too close, never offering comfort. Rats scuttle across the street, pausing briefly to sniff at the splintered wood, their movements bold in the absence of living witnesses. The carpenters work methodically, lifting board after board, revealing glimpses of lives paused mid-motion, of families suspended in fear and illness. The fog curls closer around them, pressing against hair and clothing, weaving its cold fingers into their sleeves and collars. The city exhales, damp and heavy, as though acknowledging each revelation with a shiver. Finally, the last board is removed. The house is exposed in full, its secrets laid bare to the cold morning light. The carpenters step back, hands trembling, hearts heavy. The silence is complete, only broken by the faint, lingering cough that drifts from the interior, a reminder that life here persists in its smallest, most fragile form. And as the men retreat down the alley, the fog thickens once more, curling around the exposed doorway like a shroud. London waits, patient, unyielding, watching the lifting of the boards and the truths the city is only beginning to learn. In the waning light of late afternoon, a rare sound drifts through the fog-choked streets of Bishopsgate, a single, tentative laugh, delicate and fragile, carried on the damp air like the memory of sunlight. For weeks, laughter had vanished from the city. Children had grown silent behind bolted doors and shuttered windows, their small voices swallowed by fear, illness, and the weight of absence. But now, one small sound rises above the pervasive stillness, quivering yet persistent, like a single flame daring to burn in a tomb. Inside a narrow, half-darkened house, a girl of 7 sits perched on her mother's lap. The fire in the hearth has burned low, the embers flickering faintly, casting long, trembling shadows across the walls. She breathes in slowly, her small chest rising with cautious rhythm. For the first time in days, she feels a moment of relief, a flicker of warmth that is not the fever's heat but a trace of hope. Her lips part and the sound escapes uncertain, short but unmistakably laughter. The mother freezes, eyes wide, heart racing. She clutches her child closer, whispering a prayer under her breath. The laughter grows slightly bolder, a stuttered, uneven melody that fills the room and presses lightly against the walls. The father, slumped beside them, lifts his head slowly, blinking as though the world has realigned. For the first time in weeks, he allows himself a small, unsteady smile, though the pallor of illness has left him gaunt and trembling. Outside, the streets remain quiet, yet the faint echoes of the laugh curl outward, slipping between shuttered windows and bolted doors. Neighbors peer cautiously through the slats, drawn by the sound they had almost forgotten existed. A man leans on a post, listening, eyes wide as he senses a momentary shift in the weight of the fog, a pause in the oppressive stillness that has gripped the city. Somewhere down the lane, a rat freezes mid-step, whiskers quivering as if sensing the change, the tiniest ripple in a city that has learned to measure life in absence. The house itself seems to exhale with the laughter, releasing days of oppressive silence into the damp air. Dust motes shimmer faintly in the weak candle light, spinning like tiny sparks, catching the warmth of a moment too fleeting to be fully believed. Outside, the fog thins imperceptibly, retreating just enough to let a sliver of pale light illuminate the wet stones, revealing traces of footprints that remind the city there are still those who survive. The mother wipes a tear from her cheek, unsure whether it is sorrow or relief. She rocks the child gently, whispering encouragement, allowing herself to hear the sound repeated. The father reaches out to touch both of them, fingers trembling, palm pressed against the small warmth of life that has persisted in defiance of fear and disease. In the streets, London listens, holding its breath, almost afraid to believe. The carts of the dead have passed. The fog is thick, heavy, insistent. Yet for this brief instant, the city senses something delicate, fleeting, impossible, that life has not completely surrendered, that even in the shadow of death a child can laugh again. The sound fades slowly, fragile as a candle's flicker, leaving behind a lingering sense of possibility. For a moment, the streets feel less like tombs and more like passageways, channels for fragile life to press forward against the relentless weight of absence. And London, silent and patient, absorbs the sound into its memory, knowing it will echo through the fog and stone, a quiet testament to those still daring to live. The sun climbs slowly over the horizon, pale and reluctant, filtering through the thick fog that has pressed over London for weeks. Its light falls in weak, trembling fingers across the cobblestones of Bishopsgate, glinting off puddles where rain has collected, mingling with the traces of blood, mud, and decay that mark the passage of lives lost. The streets are silent, but the silence is not emptiness. It is a breath held by a city that has endured far too much, a fragile pause between one suffering and the next. In the narrow alleyways, the boards have been lifted from the houses that could still be salvaged, revealing interiors heavy with the scent of fever and rot, yet alive with the faintest pulse of survival. Carpets once walked upon now lie damp and uneven. Chairs lean crookedly, bearing the imprint of those who will never return. A mother sits cradling her child in a house on the corner, rocking gently, whispering prayers into the dim air, and the child stirs, eyes blinking, against the weak light. For the first time in what feels like months, small sounds, soft coughs, rustling clothes, the tentative steps of cautious feet begin to thread through the stillness, fragile signals of life returning. Along the river, the Thames moves with a tentative rhythm. The water is thick with debris, broken barrels, and driftwood, yet it carries also the faint glimmer of hope reflected in the pale sun. A few boats, abandoned for weeks, drift in the current, empty but steadfast, waiting for hands to guide them once more. The gulls have returned, their cries sharp and piercing, slicing through the quiet like a reminder that the world persists outside of fear. In the marketplace, the smell of rotting fruit and spoiled grain has begun to lift, carried away by a breeze that moves for the first time without the weight of disease clinging to it. Agatha, the last bread seller, rolls her cart slowly through the wet stones, arranging loaves with care. Her hands are steady, her breath visible in the crisp morning air, and she hums softly, the sound carrying faintly to a street, long silent. A few neighbors peek through the shutters, hesitant but drawn by the familiar melody, their eyes wide with cautious recognition. Even the carts that had carried the dead move now without burden, empty, their wheels creaking faintly, a muted echo of nights past. Rats scuttle through alleys, bold but cautious, sensing the change in the air, the slow lifting of the weight that has pressed upon the city. The streets, still wet and glistening, seem to stretch and shift, holding the memory of absence, yet embracing the first signs of recovery. At St. Bartholomew's, a priest steps onto the threshold, arms outstretched. The church doors, once shuttered, swing gently in the wind. Candlelight spills out into the square, weak but warm, illuminating faces worn thin with fear and fatigue. Children peek from doorways, stepping carefully into light that feels unfamiliar yet comforting. Mothers breathe more freely, fathers straighten, and the city's rhythm begins to pulse once more, a hesitant heartbeat pressing against the silence. London rises slowly from the dust. It is battered, scarred, and weakened, yet it rises. The fog begins to lift in wisps, drifting into the sky like smoke from long-extinguished fires. The streets smell faintly of wet stone and new beginnings. The city exhales, a breath long held, carrying with it the faint tremor of hope. And as the sun edges higher, pale and unwavering, London, haunted, hollowed, but unbroken, breathes again.